Defense of Dark Souls 2. A measured response. This is part 7 and 8. Hopefully. Try to get through as much as I can. And after that, we will be playing through Dark Souls 2. To see if it's as bad as I remember it, or if it's better than I remember it. So, no time to waste.
I think maybe the over-the-top dislikes some fans exhibited towards Dark Souls 2 caused the developers to walk back on ideas that were genuinely better.
Okay, I could spend a good deal of this video defending Dark Souls 2. In fact, I'm going to compile a video looking at the central complaints about it, and why all of them are wrong and lies from criminals, and I'm going to put that up in a separate video a bit later on. When that comes up, I'll put the link here. So, okay, cool. Back to Bloodborne.
I am also eating, but try to keep my mouth shut while I do that.
Hello and welcome back to responding to In Defense of Dark Souls 2. Today we're looking into the story, and my god, this is one section I do not want to do, because a lot of the time people argue for what they felt thanks to the story, or what the story means to them, which means, generally, that we're heading into subjective town, I suppose. Now, the story in Dark Souls is an interesting topic. People's careers are based almost entirely off how difficult it is to piece together and what happens in this world and why. Dark Souls, as a series, is highly confusing, convoluted, and vague in its delivery. There is no denying it. They do not want you to understand the story without having searched for it, and even then it lacks complete answers. I assume this is all in favor of making players apply their own ideas to the story itself and discuss it with others. Now, my assessment here, and basically all my information, is coming directly from playing the games myself and, of course, the wiki, so stay with me. The first game establishes that there was a fog-ridden grey crag of a world filled with arched trees and everlasting dragons. That's pretty easy to understand, I suppose. It'd be nice to know how the dragons survive and what makes them everlasting, but, you know, we can wave that off since it's the base of the universe. This kind of attitude is considered reasonable since we don't know why the Big Bang happened, right? But we enjoy the stories of what happened in detail as a result of our planet. It's not like it's a plot hole. So we can let them have their framing, their base, without details. So we have a world. It's mostly decrepit and filled with dragons. Now suddenly, 4 people found 4 Lord Souls and with their power challenged the dragons. Now, despite that sounding really awesome, bonus points for dragons, we have nothing in terms of rules here. The Lords seem to be entities that were simply transformed by the power of the souls that they picked up. But where did these entities even come from? Where were they living with the dragons in peace or as subjects? Did these Lord Souls belong to something that wanted the dragons to be stopped? Why did these characters want to kill all the dragons anyway? Why did the souls give them powers? What were these lords doing when they didn't have the Lord Souls? What species are they anyway, since one is a witch and one is a blob of skeleton and the other one's like a large dude and then the bonus one is a furtive pygmy? What the fuck? Apparently this was before man's time. The 4 Lord Souls that were found were the souls of life, death, light and dark. Life turned the thingy into the witch, who eventually created demons. Death turned the thingy into Nito, who eventually raised the dead. Light turned Gwyn into Gwyn, eventually ushering in the Age of Fire and ultimately starting the Curse of the Undead. Dark turned the thingy into the furtive pygmy, who shattered himself across the ages in hopes that he would one day spawn a Dark Lord who would usher in the Age of Dark. Okay, why do these souls have this effect? Does this work if a dragon were to have picked up the soul? Where did the first flame come from that provided these souls? Did someone set all of this up? Why don't the dragons know anything about this since they are confirmed as intelligent beings? How does one start an Age of Fire? Is it like a bonfire placed in the kiln and then...
So the story of Dark Souls is very confusing, and the very first of anything that you get for Dark Souls in terms of story is just that, story. You get a cutscene at the very beginning of the game. in my opinion, which that's all it is, the beginning cutscene of Dark Souls is just what you have been told as the player. It's similar to how the story of the beginning of the universe, as he says, is the Big Bang. But there's also an alternative story of how the universe started, and that's because God spent 7 days creating the universe. So it's hard to say what the reason is for the current situation, but everything, and again, this is my perspective, whatever you want to call it, sorry, whichever one's the right way. The whole story leading up to the moment that you get your character's control doesn't matter. All you need to know is that the Age of Fire is dying, and you're told throughout the game that you should probably extend it. That's it. That's all that matters story-wise. He's doing a whole lot of, I guess at this point I wouldn't call it nitpicking because he's making good points, but there's a lot of begging the question going on here, which is fine. We're talking about the story for an hour, so I think the answer to the question, why this, why that, how did Gwyn become Gwyn, how did the Witch of Izalith become the Witch of Izalith, where they find these Lord Souls, what happened to the furtive pygmy? I mean, he's so easily forgotten. What's his name again? I think the answer is nobody knows. This is just the story that has been told and passed down through the generations. Your character doesn't know. The characters around your character don't know. There's some that claim to, like Seath and Kath, or Kaith, whatever his name is. But they could also be lying to you. Koth seems to be telling the truth. Frampt seems to be lying to you. It doesn't really make sense. It's up to the player to either care or not care. But again, I think the beginning of the game, the cutscene, is just what you have been told. Much like how the people who, before the Big Bang Theory, relied on the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and before them the Big Bang. I'm sorry, the the 7 days to create the world, as the foundation of this is how all life came into being. That's my perception.
Permeates through.
Which is, I would say my argument is a little bit bolstered by the fact that, as I already said, throughout the entire game, characters lie to you in different ways.
Of the world and powers up every bonfire. Like, many people say it was done using the power of the soul. What is the power of the soul, and how do they all know how to wield it to create an Age of Fire? Which means what exactly? There's a lot of flames and stuff? Like, it's got nothing to do with the sun, right? It's more to do with the powering and the maintenance of the fires within the world, and the power of the beings within that world. Since apparently the curse of the undead keeps going past the Age of Fire, and people keep sort of going hollow and the world goes on. But why does the pygmy want an Age of Darkness? Anyway, there was a war, and it finished with the erasure of the vast majority of dragons. During it, one of the dragons who was born without scales.
The pygmy is the creature from which all humans descend. Or, I think as the game puts it, from which man descends from. The Witch of Izalith, Nito, Gwyn, all of his knights, they're not human. So the furtive pygmy understands that he cannot defeat the dragons. Or I say he. The furtive pygmy cannot. They understand that they cannot defeat the dragons and Gwyn and Izalith and Nito. In lieu of this, the furtive pygmy, much like your player character, does fight alongside the other 4. Or other 3, rather. Actually, I don't even know if that's ever confirmed. What's confirmed is just, and maybe it is in the cutscene, whether the furtive pygmy fights alongside the other lords or not is something that I don't know off the top of my head. What I do know is the furtive pygmy, instead of trying to take a seat at the throne where Gwyn is, or recreate the first flame in Lost Izalith, or, controlling a massment of the dead in the underworld, bides their time and uses the soul, from my understanding, to create humans, of which you are one in the game. The furtive pygmy, so easily forgotten, I think is a fantastic line, because you end up getting one of the Lord's souls from the New Londo 4 Kings fight. Which again, I think is funny that there's so much more to this video, and I'm just going to see if he explains it, but it's just funny that, like, you technically do fight the furtive pygmy, but just his descendants, which are also, like, all the hollowed individuals and unhollowed individuals that are human throughout the entire game. Anyway.
Betrayed the dragons and allied with Gwyn to bring an end to them. Okay, so there was a big war, and it was won by Team Gwyn. Cool, this began the Age of Fire. The Age of Fire involved Gwyn and his company being looked at as gods while living in Anolondo. They ruled over a flourishing Lordran and hunted remaining dragons for sport. However, it was always going to come to an end, in the same vein that all fires eventually burn out, so there were attempts to extend the Age of Fire. The Witch of Izalith tried to create a new and powerful first flame to replace the one that's currently fading, and in doing so, created the Flame of Chaos, a flame that spawned demonkind, and while it flourished, so did they. In response, Gwyn's knights battled the demons and failed to defeat them, resulting in the hopes that they could be contained within Izalith forever. As a direct result of the inability to control the flame, it consumed the Witch of Izalith and twisted her and her sisters into horrifying amalgamations. Gwyn attempted to extend the flame himself, and so sacrificed his Lord Soul and split it with his clan, his children, the 4 kings, and Seath. This also ushered in the Curse of the Undead. This is when a creature is branded with the dark sign, and upon death is reformed back to the last fire they rested at. But for every time they do, they lose humanity and their collected souls until they eventually go hollow, and are essentially a distant shadow of their former selves. The world is now filled with small amounts of the living, abominations, and copious amounts of the dead, filled with stories of heroic and villainous acts, with a strong theme of the cyclical nature of life and death, and how clinging on to what once was is futile because everything eventually fades. The player moves through this land 1,000 years on, and everything is hollowing, decaying, and engulfed in scars of what once was.
Yep.
Everything is lashing out, confused, and clinging on to any sense of life that remains. Through several interactions with the characters of the world, you are set with the task of ending the Age of Fire or prolonging it. Ultimately, this would be the decision at the end of the game, choosing to sustain the hollow world, or bring something new, something potentially better, or worse. Do you guys see what I just did? I began, probably to much of my own viewers' disdain, talking about the story while thinking about it in terms of logical plot points and writing consistency within settings rules. Then as I went on, I stopped questioning anything and just enjoyed the basic premise and progression of these fantastical creatures committing to actions and receiving consequences for them. At the end of my little speech, I started using emotive language that appeals to your emotional view of the story, and it may have made you think about the theme involved on your own personal level, how it may have applied to your own life, or the way that you look at life, or the game. The story is really cool. It's really interesting. It encourages people to dig deeper and headcanon reasoning for why certain events took place and what they mean. This story is also poorly written. Oh god, I'm so sorry, but it's true. Dark Souls is filled with an extreme omission of universal rules and description of motivation of characters and attention to events taking place. There is only a vague through line that you can grasp once you read the entire wiki or watch every video on YouTube, and even then it's filled with admission of lack of explanation from the source material. Though what I am saying is so controversial that I think I'm gonna have to change it. Maybe you guys won't agree that the story is badly written, but will you at least admit that storytelling is bad in this game? As in, the method in which the story is given to us is extremely inefficient or simply bad. There is a YouTuber who I have both criticized and enjoyed in the past called I Hate Everything, and he was criticized for his critical perspective of Destiny's story. Now, he criticizes Destiny's story because you have to read the story in the grimoire cards online. It essentially means that you have to go online and piece together what actually happened in the universe via the descriptions on all of the different cards. Now, that's not essentially the same as Dark Souls, as all of the items are within the world, but finding all of them and piecing together the names and places is so difficult that you are certainly better off doing it through the wiki. And so, when responding to criticism, I Hate Everything said this, and I think it's very relevant here.
Destiny's good story is in the grimoire cards, dumbass. It's in the grimoire cards. Sorry, I didn't know that. How about you read them, then remake this video? Did you even watch the fucking video? Did you even watch what I said? Did you even watch what I fucking said? You think I should compliment a game's story for requiring me to leave the video game, actively go away from the thing that's supposed to be telling me the story, log into my Bungie account on the fucking website, and go through some cards that you click and they spin around all nice and animated, and then you can read the lore. Oh, that's really great storytelling. That's really making the most out of fucking video games. Wow, what a brand new medium. Reading cards on the internet. What a fucking great way of telling a story. Good job, Bungie. I take back everything I've said.
Basically, it's not good. If you're familiar with my channel, then you'll know what I call objectively good or bad is measurable, while what can be enjoyable or fun is what I call subjectively good or bad. It's pretty simple. This story is subjectively fantastic or terrible.
So he's about, I'm kind of telegraphing what his point's going to be. The story is good in this game, but the storytelling is bad, and I agree. When I first played through Dark Souls and I was talking to people, I was kind of confused as to, like, okay, am I the good guy or am I the bad guy? But before I got to Sun's Fortress, and actually, after killing, I think it was the Belfry Gargoyles, I was so angry because it was my first Souls game that I just stopped giving a fuck about the story. And that's kind of the best way to it. That's kind of the best way I enjoyed Dark Souls, was that I just abandoned caring about the story. Because if I cared about the story, I would have been probably disappointed by the storytelling that I was used to. Like Fallout 3, for instance, was probably the game that I played before this. And in Fallout 3, the story is basically explained to your face. And I agree. Look, there's another aspect to it too of the type of person I am when I play video games. I don't really give a shit about the story. So after I finished Dark Souls, and I didn't really understand the story because, again, the storytelling is not done well in this game, I went and played through again and started reading the item descriptions because, first of all, A, I wanted to play again, and B, I wanted to know more about the story. Again, it cycles back to what I was talking about in the last part, that I am the explorer type of individual, and when it comes to exploration in video games, sometimes also there is a storytelling aspect to it as well. Again, I mainly care about traversing the environment and such like that, but I think he's absolutely right if that's the point he's going to make, that the story is good, but the storytelling is dog shit. Again, let's just see what he was going to say.
Depending on what you get from it on a personal level or investment. Objectively, it's a nonsensical mess that ignores several basic writing rules to allow for incredible set pieces to take place. Without sharing an understanding of what things do and what they are, it is impossible to get a meaningful investment from a realistic perspective, but what it means to you as a story? Well, that might be incredible. Let me show you how I look at this. In Game of Thrones, death is final. You don't get to go again. They make this rather morbidly clear in their first season, and when a certain character is brought back from the dead in later seasons, it is made clear that it'll rarely ever happen because of the scenario required, thus people of the world will be dying 99% of the time, permanently. This creates a genuine sense of fear and meaningful investment in your characters, knowing that if something should happen to them, it means, as dictated by the universal rules, that you may not see them again. Comparatively, in a show like Supernatural, characters are killed in almost every episode. They are often introduced and killed immediately after, yet our main characters brush with death constantly and survive. They are each stabbed and shot, and in one case dragged to hell by hounds in order to be tortured for 30 years, but still come right back in a mere episode. This extends to the point where in season 13, a major character was murdered in the show. The fans' reaction was, "Ah, he'll be back, he's already died 4 times." Also, this is true, I checked the Supernatural wiki. This creates an almost sitcom-like investment in the show where you're enjoying it far less for the substantial content and more for the fun of it, for the ride, if you will. The more subjective side of writing. The reason I'm talking about this is that I'm a stickler for universal rules. They really make, a story bind together. In Dark Souls, you really aren't able to grip with the story when you're given all of the information within it, because there is no sense of permanence with any of the actions of these people. The ages aren't explained in terms of what they even do or why everyone's afraid of them. People do things that are so removed from any understanding of a rule set that you are simply trying to understand the events that unfold. It reminds me of comparing Breaking Bad to Walking Dead. In one show, several characters are developed and maintained throughout, reacting and learning circumstances until they have to make choices that have realistic results. In a TV show universe, it is most punctured by aggressive and dramatic conversations and actions, or deaths. In another show, we get plowed with a myriad of characters that get confusing developments based on being bored and each having an expiry date that results in them dying once they or the writers have decided that they've had their course, and suddenly zombies gain powers or the characters temporarily become stupid. This means that you don't understand the world it takes place in or why things change. How do you even begin to have a meaningful investment in something like that? The answer is, just don't think about it. Or, this stuff isn't important. Or, any story can be torn apart like that. When it comes to objective writing quality, I don't expect any of my viewers to outright agree with my scale, but my scale is predicated on measuring the components and showing why they have an effect on the world and on us. I am of course okay with not knowing why Quelaag was corrupted from the waist down alone. I would actually like just to know the idea behind confidently thinking they could create the first flame. I'd like to know more of the characters' involvement with it. I'd like to know what they discussed and how it came about, since it spawned the demons of the world and resulted in actions that caused the curse of the undead. Speaking of which, why did the linking of the flame do that? These things are catastrophic, and seeing the characters in the world develop a strong reasoning based on their flaws or strengths while owning their mistakes and growing from them, defining future choices, is the potential this story had. Instead, there are a lot of meaningful events that simply happen without substance or development. From what I could tell, people actually cried at that character I referenced dying for the 4th time in Supernatural, as they've cried watching The Walking Dead, I'm sure. And that is literally an undeniable admission that anything can have any effect on anyone. The content can subjectively be valued at any point on a scale, but objectively, Dark Souls is similar to many stories that lack a consistent set of rules and serve to immerse you in a cool world. Lord of the Rings comes to mind for me as an example of a super cool world with interesting characters that ask you to ignore several moments that create so many questions in terms of writing. Plot holes, big or small, many or few, all have different effects, and once you really think deeply about the ones that are present, you can spot moments in which these things were skipped for lack of effort or talent, or because they wanted fans to think of reasons for it themselves, which, regardless of the reasoning, still results in the same level of quality. Things may be left out because you can't reasonably explain it. Things that are explained sometimes make no bloody sense. This is prevalent throughout the Souls series, and I will understand all of you probably disagreeing with me on this. I really don't see why anybody would agree with me when they love this game. But since this is simply a response series, I'm not going further than to explain myself a little bit. Like, honestly, if I wanted you guys to understand my perspective on story writing, I would literally take a few hours just to go through a lot of different things and try to piece it together for you. But the point of this was groundwork for responding to Harris. My premise is, there aren't a huge amount of truly great stories written to perfection. It is far more likely to find standard or bad stories that you can simply connect to and enjoy, and that's absolutely fine. The Souls games have plot hole-ridden stories and lore that mostly lacks any sense of rules or consistency that serves as a vehicle for the games and something for fans to speculate on. This is very similar to Five Nights at Freddy's. They cover a myriad of character types and basic themes that I feel have been covered better, yet still evoke a huge amount of emotion in people to the point of them denying suicide. I would never say that doesn't have value, because of course it does, but it could be a hell of a lot better in its quality of writing and its delivery throughout the games. With that being said, let's begin the story
Look at her
section.
hands. God
Dark
damn.
Souls 1 is, on a technical level, interesting and complex. The opening cinematic explains the setup of the world of the story. Gwyn and co mess up the ancient dragons, build a society using the power of the soul, and people start becoming undead and going mad, and the Empire eventually collapses when the flames start to go out and Gwyn fucks up trying to fix it. But what the player actually does is run around a mostly empty world, killing the people who remain so they can open a big door.
He opens in saying that the game on a technical level is interesting and complex. I assume this is in relation to the gameplay and not the story. I'm not sure. He then describes the story in short, and that's fine, but then he says what the player does is run around a mostly empty world, killing the people who remain so they can open a big door. This is very reductive, but it's also entirely applicable to Dark Souls 2, but perhaps he will explain.
There isn't much actual interaction with this story. The stuff about everlasting dragons and a war to kill them all doesn't really have much of an impact on the story of the player killing the people who killed them and nicking their souls. What the first game excels at is lore.
We have to take this slow because it's such a confusing set of descriptors. First of all, what would it mean to have an interaction with the story of Dark Souls since you kill all of the remaining significant players, choose to push the world forward or maintain it? Of the story that occurs in the game, you have the most important hand in it. Of the story of how Dark Souls came to be, you have no part in it. He says the opening has no effect on the story the player is involved with, but we understand that Dark Souls takes place because of the events in the opening. It is simply the previously on equivalent for a video game, and if that previously is what you wanted the game to be about, well, that's a completely different game, not to mention the fact that if we had an army of dragons to fight as an army of knights, don't you think that just wouldn't play out well with the base mechanics that Dark Souls offers? He says the first game excels at lore, which is basically the story that is past, the story that enriches the world. I would say that it's just as good as Dark Souls 2 in both regards, but again, let's hear the argument.
In the sense that through item descriptions and chance encounters with the people who remain in the world and are safe to talk to, you can learn little tidbits about them as people. You can run into a character, have a brief conversation, and be sure that if you pay attention to the world and objects related to them or their people, you'll learn something about them and their culture.
I agree entirely that this is the method in which the Souls games dole out their story, past and present. Environmental storytelling, a method that is indirect.
The closest you get to a story is a guy saying "ring some bells." Fuck your family. This is the reason for the whole mission. Like, you meet this guy who's like, you know, my family have this fucked up, stupid belief.
I don't know what you think a story is, but what you're referring to is motivation for pushing the story forward. I agree that this is something that is very important for any video game with a storyline that wants to be taken seriously, so let's look at your assessment. You meet this guy who has this fucked up belief. Oscar is the man who set you free moments ago. He's the only thing you would have a connection to in this world, since freedom is inherently something everyone wants, and he provided it to you. He describes you as something other than hollow, implying that is what you've seen previously. He then tells you he is dying and is soon to lose his sanity. He asks you to do something for him, potentially as a fair trade for him freeing you, and because both of you share the fate of being undead. He tells you he failed his mission, but that you can potentially keep the torch lit. Thou who art undead art chosen in thine exodus from the undead asylum, maketh pilgrimage to the land of ancient lords. When thou ringeth the bell of awakening, the fate of thou undead shalt know. He's telling you as an undead that you have a fate, and if you want to know what it is, you must ring the bell of awakening. Whether he is lying or crazy is unclear, and he laments that you now know what his task was and he can die hoping that you'll complete it. After that he provides you with a key and the Estus and then waits to die, regrettably admitting that he will be a danger soon enough. As motivation goes, one would be set to go and ring a bell to know more about what the hell is going on, and when you are told that the Age of Fire is ending and you alone have the power to choose whether it will truly end or continue, the investment could be through the roof for player to player. Or you could look at it this way.
You meet this guy who's like, you know, my family have this fucked up, stupid belief.
Now, as I've said previously, it's about the player. The motivation in all three Souls games is the same. You have to kill shit and then take over what you killed was trying to do in the first place. A cyclical tale of life and death, coming and going, rising and falling. I'm okay with Harris having this perspective on Dark Souls 1. I simply hope he is consistent and maintains it for Dark Souls 2.
Or another guy saying "ring some bells," or a serpent saying, "Hey, Gwyn was cool, kill his friends," or a different serpent saying, "Gwyn wasn't cool at all, he was really rude, kill his friends." The fun of the game comes from figuring out a complete picture of what you can find, but there isn't really a narrative happening for most of it. The player isn't really given a chance to interact with the important events in this world, they're just picking up the pieces of stuff that already happened.
As to the first part, you can summarize almost any story that way. For example, oh, you're gonna go to Drang Lake for some reason. Oh, there's a king who's done stuff, go kill him. Oh, I think he lives here, go kill him. Oh, I guess he's fine, go kill something else. Now, I've already done a long enough job proving that Harris was extremely biased with Oscar alone, so excuse me for asking that you trust me when I say Harris is removing massive amounts of important details of what these creatures tell you. It isn't a very strong method to share your ideas if you completely ignore the perspective of those who do think this is a valuable motivation. As I said, with Oscar, anyone would be fueled for the whole game in avenging the guy who freed them, or not. Is it well written? Well, not from my perspective, but that doesn't dictate player investment, and that is subjective. And it is the same quality as Dark Souls 2. You said that you don't interact with the important events of the world. You kill what remains of the 4 great lords and the protectors of Anor Londo. You acquire the Lord Vessel, which enables you to choose whether to move the world into a new age, and you don't have the involvement in the important events in the world?
Which is a fantastic point, because of the lords that are still alive, you kill Gwyn. He's hollow, but you kill him. He's the final boss of the game. You kill Seath the Scaleless, who didn't have a Lord Vessel, but he was one of them. He did betray his kind. So you kill him as well. And if you really want to talk about a lord who you kill, Grave Lord Nito is still there. He's not hollow. He's actually just resting in his fucking big-ass coffin the entire time. So you literally kill, at least if you want to pick them, one of the great lords that defeated the dragon. I'm not sure how that isn't an important change to the world. Like Mahler is saying, H Bomber is just, I don't know if it's cherry picking or what the hell it is, because I'm not a good arguer, but...
In comparison, to me, Dark Souls 2 does something really interesting. You get a cool
in comparison to
sequence
me, I love the language.
A dark sign branded character's family melts away under the weight of the curse, making you live so long you forget everything. Already we're given our first proper theme, and it works on both the personal and world level, in that the world is making less and less sense because things are falling away, which, by the way, coincides really well with the fact the world design is like that.
He opens with saying that to him, Dark Souls 2 does something really interesting, which I find strange since it's almost undeniable that all of From Software's creations are incredibly interesting. A whole new set of worlds bringing life to old tales of bravery and war while breathing life into dragons and other fantastical elements. But yeah, that's fine. He describes the opening of Dark Souls 2 as cool while talking about the theme that it clearly represents. Everything fades to obscurity and loss when afflicted with the curse of the undead. But this applies aptly to reality. Now, as I said previously, you can gain from the content whatever you will. Harris is clearly already showing his preference for the on-the-nose storytelling versus subtlety, in that the theme of Dark Souls 1 was far more embedded in its depiction of events rather than essentially telling you in the opening cutscene. And you know what? It's fine to have a preference for that, but I loved receiving this theme after thinking about the fate of Gwyn and what the Curse of the Undead meant for our supporting cast, which I felt was delivered with far more finesse. He then says the idea of things falling away is represented in the world design also, and these things mingle together well. The world actually has logical slots for all of the land to come together. It is extremely boring. It is a sense of straight paths originating from the center, outside of placing lava at the top of the world in one instance, inconsistent weather here and there, and having Uldia's Keep cutting through a set of established maps. Everything is mostly fine. Just boring. Besides, what is falling away in the opening is time. It is a metaphorical representation of all the years that passed, since we can imagine that the man in the opening had a curse while his wife and child did not. He has outlived them. He has forgotten them. So when he says things are falling apart, it's an actual weak description on purpose to try and make it seem consistent across the world, but it's really not. Uldia's Keep being placed lazily in the world cannot be looked at as fucking genius. Let's move on.
The story itself, to start with, is self-consciously a rehash of the previous game. The Emerald Herald tells you need to face the king, and to do that you need some big souls. Oh, cool, thanks, nice one. So you do that. Along the way you find areas and bosses strangely evocative of the previous ones. Najka is, shall we say, Quelaag adjacent. The gutter is very Blight Towny, and so on.
So, running with the idea that the world is cyclical, then yes, this all follows nicely, and there are a few new places as well as ideas stemming from the old, which is neatly running in place of the themes that Dark Souls 1 predicated.
There's a lot of parallels, but it's never quite made clear that you're explicitly in the same world as Lordran, or at least not the same places. there's just a subtle thing in the back of your head about how this all seems oddly familiar. So you kill all the enemies, and on the way there are these occasional locked doors. There's no explicit sense that you're missing any large areas. All the paths terminate in dead ends or weird shrines with the primal bonfires in them.
Now he is basically stating facts, and I completely agree with him. The world is eerily familiar with many elements that never outwardly present itself as future Lordran, which is neatly tying the theme once again.
The game is pretty long just accounting for these 4 paths, so when you go to Castle Drangleic you get the sense this really is the end game. You progress all the way through the castle to the shrine beneath, and then through the Grave of Saints. There's a real sense of build-up.
So this is more down to the player, since I really didn't absorb the instructions of the Emerald Herald on my first playthrough personally. When asking friends what their assessment of the story was after beating the game, one of them said, "Why did I need to kill a giant to fight the boss, and why did I have to go inside a giant tree?" I didn't have an answer at the time because I was early in research for this series, but he looked it up, found a decent enough answer, and moved on. The reason I'm referencing this is that not everyone has the same experience. I didn't even recognize that I was meant to be killing a king. I just wanted to fight bosses and discover lands because the combat and RPG elements of Dark Souls is precisely what I believe the game excels at. It turns out people can have different experiences. I know it's crazy, let's move on.
Then you fight Velstad, who's guarding the door to Vendrick. After beating him, you finally go to meet your presumably final opponent, the same final opponents you fought in Demon's Souls and Dark Souls 1, the corrupted king of the world you've been walking through. But instead, this happens.
The bell weapon was so fucking cool. that two-handed bell weapon, awesome. I thought it was really cool.
The way he described all of this is accurate, I do not disagree with it, but something that is already clear is that he thinks this is better in terms of delivery compared to the previous games.
Vendrick is a shadow of the man talked about in the lore and by the characters that remember him. He, like the fate of the rest of the undead, like the player's character will eventually become, has lost his mind. You don't have to fight Vendrick at all. He's not your enemy. He's just a man who lost his way and everything else with it.
Again, we are now reaching into subjective territory. As much as I agree with his brief assessment there, the issue is whether people were aware this is the case at all. Personally, I saw this guy and thought, ah, he's hollowed and out of his mind. We can take his stuff and leave him alone, I guess. That sucks for him. It wasn't as impactful for me because I personally wasn't aware of the story, but who cares? I didn't know what I was talking about. Once I did know, it raised a few issues for me, primarily that this was a little on the nose compared to Gwyn. Gwyn was set as a boss for any player who wasn't paying strong attention to the story. Defending the kiln of the first flame seemed like it fit with the rest of the game for most people, I suppose, so fighting him would have felt normal, and some players may even have asked why they made him so easy. What they may have missed is that Gwyn, in the ending days of the Age of Fire, was only concerned with extending the Age of Fire for himself and his creation, which you are more than able to do for him, so being hostile towards you makes no sense, unless we think back even to Oscar, talking about becoming a threat after losing his sanity. It may open your mind to the possibility that as 1,000 years have passed, Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight, hollowed, and now at the kiln, in his confused and frail state, is attacking anything that walks through his door. He lost his mind while remaining near the first flame, hoping to rekindle it after sacrificing his own soul. You read about his power, his massive army, his undeniable majestic creation, and after fighting through what remains of his knights and down a dark and dreary path, you are greeted with a tragic soundtrack to reinforce that this man is nothing compared to the god that came before. You put him out of his misery, and finally make your choice. His remaining power and agency were direct reflections of the curse he himself brought to the world. The curse that forces everything to go screaming into the darkness until they forget everything about themselves and the world surrounding them. Similarly to those stricken with dementia, and that is tragic as a realization about the world of Dark Souls and our very own world. As now, more than ever, history is being hidden away for its offensive nature, enabling us to make the same mistakes. But that was subjective. What I got from the whole thing is for me alone. I think it was cleverly put together to have Gwyn slip under the radar as to what his demise and legacy truly meant, while I still maintain that the story is pretty standard or kind of just bad in terms of quality. Themes have a way of sneaking into someone's analysis and infecting the objective part of the discussion. Dark Souls has so many elements that people connect to while having something incredible in terms of a world and gameplay to embrace, that it seems like the story must just be up there with the rest of it. The point is, once once again, what you take from these stories is down to the player, and personally, me and Harris connected better with the former and latter games in the series. I am a huge fan of subtlety, and it'll always resonate with me more. Seeing Vendrick so clearly hollowed and walking around was a little bit much for me, but again, everyone can take from the material what they want.
It's hard to relate how touching this is. The game genuinely feels like it was building to the very final confrontation. The room is built to have a dramatic passage down steps similar to the lead up to Gwyn, and it's built so that the camera naturally passes through it to reveal what Vendrick has become. I feel bad for spoiling it for people who haven't experienced the game yet, but this moment is pivotal to what makes the story interesting.
So yeah, this is what I was talking about. You can take from it what you will. As stories generally go, with finding something touching, everyone will be all over the map. Harris personally found it very touching. As for spoilers, I don't know why people would be watching a Defense of Dark Souls 2 that is an hour and 20 minutes long without expecting that, but he's right, the whole series is something you should go in with no information about, to be honest. It seriously benefits from the way it teaches you how to play and absorb its content, though I find it funny once again that he's saying this now, but you know, just a little bit earlier he's talking about how he has to tell his friends all the different things about how to play these games.
You're built up for the traditional Souls game encounter with a fallen king, and instead you're faced with a thing to whom it doesn't even occur to fight you anymore, shambling around almost naked. You just have to pick up the King's Ring, which unlocks the final areas and allows you to head to Aldier's Keep, and eventually meet the Ancient Dragon, who's also not interested in fighting you. He gives you the Ashen Mist Heart, which lets you journey into the memories of giants from the old war Vendrick fought.
So he implies that the encounter with Vendrick is unlike the Fallen King encounters in the previous games, which is strange to me since both games retain this sort of encounter, just with different details in execution. He is starting to show his hand. Everything else is just him explaining the following objectives.
You get to see a lot of the damage that you encounter in the main path happening. It's really neat. Killing the Giant Lord lets you face Nashandra, Vendrick's queen at the Throne of Want. Killing her nets you precisely one ending. Your character sits on the throne, presumably having become the new king, and then the credits play.
You really only see the statue being knocked into place in the memories of the giants. The rest of it is just the same place as before with different filters and enemies that we've seen previously being buffed, topped with an incredibly lackluster boss in terms of mechanical variety, but hey, the rest is true and it is fine to feel that it was great, I suppose, except for the fact that you said it nets you precisely one ending, which, I mean, the game has two endings canonically in its definitive edition, but I'm sure he knows that. Though the interesting part is that what he just described so novelly, that's the bit, by the way. That is the actual bit that Joseph Anderson said is the weakest part of the game.
And this is the weakest part of the game as far as I'm concerned.
Is that going to pop up here? Of course not. I mean, it's fine because, you know, maybe H-Bomber Guy didn't see Joseph Anderson. No, we know that he did.
But instead of resetting the game, it just carries on. You're put back in the world. The game deliberately undercuts its story. You win, but what do you win? Kingship over a dying world? The chance to sit in a chair? Only one character in the game even recognizes you as the new king, Shalquar, the seemingly immortal cat who also knows most of the rest of the lore about the other bosses.
The reason the game doesn't immediately reset is likely that you don't get forced into New Game Plus. Many players considered that to be frustrating since you may want to explore the world a little more once you rekindle the flame, and you could have fallen into losing your character's progression in the world at the time. This assisted the narrative, the idea of a cyclical world, since the moment you complete the story it begins again, as if nothing's changed, except the potential for time passing, cementing the theming of the whole game. In Dark Souls 2, I actually appreciate that they made it more mechanically friendly in terms of sending me to the home base, but it was obstructive to the narrative by having a menu selection reset the world instead of it being natural as a result, because now it implies that your character activates some form of time travel through a bonfire, I suppose. Other than that, Harris talks from his personal experience, describing what being sent to the home world means for him. I don't know why saying the cat recognizing you as a king is even relevant, since the world being truly unchanged would fit his narrative better, and the cat being uncaring about who is the monarch would likely show your effect on the world better, but yeah, you gotta justify anything, right? Like, anything that gets in your way, you just gotta make it a part of the positives.
If you want to, you can use bonfire ascetics to refight old bosses or refresh enemies if you exhaust them, or you can completely kill all the NPCs, even the Emerald Herald. You can make the world of Dark Souls 2 completely empty of people and monsters. The only way to access New Game Plus is to sit at a bonfire and deliberately choose to start it all over again. I like these choices because they hammer home the hopelessness of the Dark Souls story that was there in 1, but undercut by the fact no matter what ending you got, you just started at the beginning again.
So then he moves on to talking about bonfire aesthetics, which honestly, as mechanics go, are pretty damn cool in letting you selectively push parts of the game into New Game Plus, and he probably should have spent more time talking about it since they benefit the experience, but this video...
So, yes, overall, bonfire aesthetics are a good addition. to Dark Souls 2. Being able to push areas of the game into New Game without going into New Game was good. ... However, there is an NPC who has extremely rare drops. I'm forgetting what the name of this character is right now. But it's the guy, the explorer who invades you in the Grave of Saints, or not the Grave of Saints, but the Royal Rat Vanguard area. He wears the invisible armor. A visible version of that armor is available only on one NPC in No Man's Wharf on the ship. And he does not respawn upon death. So you have to push the game into Bonfire, into another New Game Plus with a Bonfire aesthetic to farm that enemy. If you want their armor. It takes a fucking long time, and it is very unfun to do. So I think the Bonfire aesthetics are great. I think that putting certain items in New Game Plus was not great. Especially when you can just work around that issue by hitting a Bonfire aesthetic and still be in just New Game. And also tying a specific armor that you can only get as a rare drop from an enemy that doesn't respawn and only appears on New Game Plus and further is extremely unfun. Barring that one issue that I have with it, one issue, I think it's totally fun. And I really like Bonfire aesthetics.
Is not what the title implies. It is solely about proving that Dark Souls 1 isn't as good as Dark Souls 2. He talks about how you can theoretically make Dark Souls 2 empty by exhausting it of its inhabitants, which is more mechanically based in making the runs through the areas easier for players, but narratively, doesn't it make no sense that they don't reappear considering how the Curse of the Undead works? And then you get to respawn them if you use an ascetic? How does that match narratively? Like, everything should remain there for the sake of the cyclical nature of the theme itself. Everything rots away until it doesn't even know why it exists, which is what creates the basic enemies. They all have 10 lives now, except for the player for some reason. He then says he liked these things because they add to the narrative, which, as I've just pointed out, they don't. They fight the narrative. Following that, he says the game restarting instantly in Dark Souls 1 undercuts the theme, when it is honestly just bloody clear that it's better. The cyclical nature, the beginning following the end, as opposed to you being sent back and then choosing when you want to restart. How could that possibly be an undercut?
Dark Souls 2 forces you to contemplate how little you've really achieved with all these deaths, and then forces you to decide when it's time to do it all again. Ultimately, Dark Souls 2 is about cycles. The story is deliberately evocative of the previous game, exploring the empire of a king who fell, but with an explicit focus on how this has all happened before, and not just coincidentally. Perhaps it's something we're doomed to keep doing. Humanity, perhaps unable to ever fully escape its own nature, is repeating its mistakes over and over.
So now he's talking more specifically about the theming of the game while describing it from a very subjective viewpoint as I did previously. All of this is fine, but he bizarrely refers to the method of delivery as forced, which I couldn't possibly agree with since many of the people I know didn't even know the plot of the first run around the game. The Dark Souls franchise isn't known for being clear the first time around, typically speaking, but I guess he's right that the theme is more ham-fisted here and he considers this a benefit, I suppose. But then he also mentions that the story is dependent on the previous game existing in order to benefit from the theme. He says there is an explicit focus on this theme in the game, so I guess we'll have to wait for the evidence, but how isn't it a focus in Dark Souls 1 as well? He implies it's all coincidental in Dark Souls 1, which... explain what that means.
For a game with so much architecture and character in so many of its designs, the best piece of imagery is the simplest one, the symbol of the dark sign. It's a loop, a circle, reflecting the way the undead return to life no matter what, continuing even after they lose their minds. Humanity itself is trapped in this loop.
Normally I would agree that this fully applies to each of the games, but as he just explained, the undead eventually stay dead in Dark Souls 2. It isn't cyclical with its inhabitants. The world has a finished point in which everything is dead until you manually bring them back to life. This flies in the face of the narrative. You are the sole power in the world now. All other bosses defeated and summonable upon your whim. Everything except you can be permanently removed and awaits your decision to resurrect it. This is the reason the cyclical narrative falls apart, but the rising and crumbling of nations is still sort of intact, though I have no idea who's birthing new humans to create these kingdoms. Yet I will still admit that it's more about how you look at it. It's just this weird attitude that Dark Souls 1 was inefficient at presenting the theme when it is simply far more subtle, which may explain why he's either missed it or misunderstood it.
The story is much more for the player than in the previous game. It's a story in which the player is expected to contemplate their own actions instead of those of others, and recognise that the problem here isn't the mistakes of the king or his people, but that people as a whole were unable to escape the mistakes that happened in Dark Souls 1. But what's even better is how it makes sure to tell you this isn't just one repeat. No, the story of Dark Souls 1 has happened maybe countless times, so many you don't know and will never fully comprehend it.
So he says the story is much more for the player than in the previous games, but I don't see how this is true whatsoever, since you are the person who will usher in the Age of Dark or continue the Age of Fire in Dark Souls 1. The story is entirely for the player to contemplate the cyclical nature of the universe. He says the player is expected to contemplate their own actions instead of those of others. Again, that is in Dark Souls 1, but perhaps you missed it. This is why I appreciate subtlety. His description past that is rather on point once again, but applies to each of the games in the series. Dark Souls 1 alone implies the story of Dark Souls has potentially taken place countless times.
In a prison cell in the Lost Bastille is a man made of stone. If you unfreeze him, he refers to himself as Strayed of Olafis. Olafis was a kingdom where Drangleic now stands, untold generations ago. So long ago that no one but Strayed and the descriptions of spells and items invented by him or belonging to him even mention it.
Wait, this? An NPC telling him about a place that doesn't exist anymore? This is the really significant difference that pushes Dark Souls 2 into the category of better serving the theme. Again, he is right that you can talk to Strayed about this, but I feel like it's really on the nose. The message of the world being stuck in a cycle of rising to power and falling to ruin is better served without a guy blurting it all out. Like, really? What? Why the hell was his statue even here? Who placed him in a doorway to a bonfire in the Lost Bastille? If it was his enemies, why didn't they fucking destroy it?
In Dark Souls 1, all the various areas and people and their stories and what happened can be pieced together quite meticulously. You can, with enough work, put together a complete universe out of the facts. In Dark Souls 2, an entire civilization can be so utterly lost that only one man even knows its name. Who knows how many empires rose and fell between Olafis and Drangleic, or Lordran and Drangleic, but pieces of them lie scattered everywhere, decayed colossal wrecks, each with their own rise to power and their own mad kings and their own undead curse rending them apart.
Okay, he opens with saying that you can understand the majority of the characters and their interactions with the story while appreciating that the world is doomed to repeat itself. You cannot put together a complete universe. Several plot points and characters are left out, and some are left out on purpose to bind certain parts of the narrative. Then he says Dark Souls 2 shows us that an entire civilization can be so utterly lost that only one man even knows its name, but this was already heavily implied by Dark Souls 1 in that the item descriptions and ramblings from NPCs were all that could breathe life into the structures and monsters of the game. That something as powerful as Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight, wouldn't even remember his own purpose. You are welcome to prefer the heavy-handed approach, but it cannot be referred to as strictly better. Hell, I think it's strictly worse.
The Forest of Fallen Giants is Vendrick's doing, but Earthen Peak, the Old Iron Keep, these places rose and fell on their own terms. The DLC, which we'll get to later, each covers its own completely separate tale of a kingdom that rose and fell in roughly the same area. What's compelling about this is that it's more bizarre, more unexplained, and more human.
He talks about how there are separate areas within their own stories of rising and falling as there is in Dark Souls 1. He says it's more bizarre, which, yes, it is bizarre that we have 3 kingdoms to teleport to, thus not having a grounded geography that are ice, fire, and poison themed, but hey, lazy. He says it's more compelling, which is totally subjective, but he says it's because it's unexplained, which mostly falls with the whole series, but there is more confusion to be had with Dark Souls 2 and its universal rules, I'll give you that. Though I really don't see how it makes the game more compelling. Then he says it's more human. How and why is something that is bizarre and unexplained tantamount to being human? Is he saying that it is more relatable? You fucking know that that is down to the person. There's no objective way to say what is more relatable for a human.
People in the Souls universe are victims of a history they might never be able to learn. The story is about being lost in a confusing maze you can never fully understand, a feeling strengthened by the nightmarishness of the actual physical world.
Okay, again, the lesson that people are victims of a world they are doomed to repeat is within Dark Souls 1, and it is far more subtle. And once again, the world isn't nightmarish. Like I said, it's mainly Uldia's Keep and the Iron Keep. The rest of it fits fine. It's just boring and simple. That's all.
Quelaag alone was simply a sad story about a woman transformed into a demon by an attempt to create more life. But now she's contextualized as a victim of a far deeper problem that mankind is having trouble escaping, because no matter what, it seems to keep happening over and over.
I don't know how many times you're going to repeat this, but it forces me to do it as well. The theme was well covered in the first game, and once again, they weren't as ham-fisted as to bring in a Quelaag clone to the story to imply repetition of a cyclical nature. The story of Dark Souls 1 did this without pounding the concept into the ground.
Something really cool and kinda subtle is hidden in the basement of Majula. Down, hidden in the dirt, so small not many people notice, is a small fractured piece of the Lord Vessel from the first game. This is the best expression of what Dark Souls 2 is doing with its story. It's interested in telling a story about being unable to fully piece together what's happening as the character loses their minds in a doomed world of destroyed statues.
Again, true, this theme is also in the first game, so if all we are now talking about is whether Dark Souls 2 does the theme well, then sure, I would say it's absolutely fine, but I know that I'll have to defend Dark Souls even more soon enough.
Your character doesn't even know what a Lord Vessel is. To them, this is nothing, just a thing lying in the dust. It also represents the developers' attempts to do their own thing and move on, by reducing an iconic part of the previous game to a piece of rubble in a basement.
How is telling the same story but making the lesson far more obvious doing your own thing? And why have we only been talking about one theme this whole time? There's so much more to explore in these stories, and you've made the same point 6 times.
For me, the weakest parts of the previous games is when I got handed a whole heap of names, roles, and backstory. Demon's Souls did this too by just listing a bunch of people who went into the fog. I could just find those people and learn about them manually, but instead the first games open with a needless roll call and a story about a fight with dragons that doesn't really tell me anything. The guys I'm going to kill killed a bunch of dragons a long time ago, and that's important because...
I'm sorry that having names and places in your world makes it harder for you to enjoy and embrace it, but I personally prefer more of that substance. I like something to cling on to, a world to build. He says the first games open with a needless roll call, but they are describing the basis for the story. It was pushed forward by characters in a world. This has so much more to get invested in, so many players and rules already established, as opposed to, you're a guy, you don't want to be a zombie, go kill a thing. As you can see, I can summarize a game just like he can, and it's incredibly frustrating when you hear any analyst do this. But when you really think about it, the opening cinematic in Dark Souls 2 is explaining in detail the subtle message in Dark Souls 1. With Dark Souls 1, they told a fantasy story with many interesting characters and elements that housed a troubling and introspective theme. Dark Souls 2 ran headlong with the theme and added, what? A guy who knew about an old kingdom? A hollowed king that was a blatant reference to the curse of the undead? And 2 pieces of the landscape that were for some reason incompetently placed down? Is there something I've missed here? However, the reason I just spoke as I did for the past 2 paragraphs was to illustrate a point. It really comes down to personal preference, which he seems to simply avoid saying as much as possible in this section. Which one you prefer and how good you think they are is down to your standards and perspective. Proving things with this takes a hell of a lot longer than Harris or I will be giving it right now. Again, if he was making an actual defense of Dark Souls 2, then he would simply be talking about Dark Souls 2's themes and plots and characters, but he has to just keep telling us that it's better than Dark Souls 1 and Demon Souls, which as you can imagine can be very off-putting for the average viewer, if there's any left by this point.
One flaw in the themes of Dark Souls 1 was, for all its criticisms of the world Gwyn had built, an awful lot of time was dedicated to his kingdom, to exploring its majesty, and even when you darken Anor Londo, you still find yourself compelled to look upon his works and despair. Dark Souls 2 does the most compelling and interesting thing it could possibly do with the story of Gwyn, Lord of Cinder, Master of Anor Londo, King of Lordran. It asks, who? I don't even think he's mentioned by name at all.
What do you mean that for all the criticisms of the world Gwyn had built? Gwyn did a pretty good job by most accounts before the fall, and Anor Londo is the equivalent of the heavens. Of course it looks incredible in the day or night. What is more compelling? The fact that somehow everything from the previous game was erased without any form of recording or events surviving the ages, or that Gwyn himself has forgotten who he was? Again, subjective.
Gwyn may well have been a good and mighty king, but the lone and level sands stretch far away, and he is gone. The paranoid king who had strayed petrified is gone. The king of Lordran is gone, and the king of Dranglake is gone, but his burnt-out husk still walks the earth yet, and we remember him for now.
Again, you are absolutely on point with the analysis for the 7th time, but which you prefer is down to the person, I'm afraid. Which is objectively better? Well, the writing is similar in both. I would say they are both on par, but I prefer subtlety personally, and I think an argument could be made for less is more here.
I think a lot of people wanted a story with the exact type of intricacies of the previous game. I can see wanting that, and understand being disappointed. But I prefer the lonesomeness and the unsolvable puzzle you're given of a world where the weight of time has dissolved away most of history, and even the physical world twists into itself in impossible ways, and icy peaks can give way to the flames of chaos. It's maddening and majestic at the same time in a way that no concretely designed physical world can ever be.
So we are now delving into the hyper-subjective. Nothing he just said is supported by any evidence at all. Firstly, the lack of intricacies was not the problem I or many others felt with the issues with the story. Personally, for the 8th time, it was just too blatant with the message and the story of a man seeking to prevent his own hollowing coming to the realization that he can't. Wasn't as interesting to me as being swept up in a world that had you complete some tasks, kill some monsters, and finally have you come to the realization of what was happening under the skin thanks to the very curse you are afflicted with. Secondly, you say you prefer the lonesomeness, which, I mean, how are you more lonesome in Dark Souls 2? The multiplayer is super fucking easy to set up, which is a boon mechanically, but narratively, not so much. Not that I'm defending Dark Souls 1 here, that game needs a serious patch for multiplayer.
Yeah.
Needs a patch for a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Thirdly, you try and link the theme to the physical world again, but as I will continue to state, it is 2 major examples and that's it. One being that lava is built.
In remembering what I had said, like I really think the netcode of both games is terrible, but being able to password yourself so that you can experience the game with friends, I guess, would qualify as that. But also, I feel like there were, don't know, didn't count them up, but I feel as though there were a lot of summons, NPC summons, in Dark Souls 2. Almost like you were intended to use them. I didn't, because I feel as though that kind of takes away from the game, but because there's got to be one. I would say, yeah, it is pretty lonely because you're the only one that ever is pretty much existing in the world. But by the same token, you can stack Majula with people, and you can always go back to them if you're feeling lonely. You got the Crestfallen Warrior that's sitting up there near the obelisk. You got the Emerald Herald that's there. The blacksmith's daughter, who's a stone carver. The cat, laddersmith Gillian. The vendor, shopkeep guy. The old hag that's also there. I mean, there's a lot of people that end up in Majula. So I don't really know if I agree with the loneliness aspect of it.
Built at the top, which is clearly a design oversight, since placing a sea of lava at the top of a windmill while maintaining the structure of everything coming together just fine is hilarious. The other being the placement of Uldia's Keep in and among several other models when looking at the world coming together, which again, likely because they had already made Shaded Woods and forgot where they planned to put the endgame sections, is incompetence. These things are not evidence of time ripping apart the world, which by the way, even if the problems with Uldia's Keep and the Iron Keep were present throughout the world, I would still say that your perspective is subjective until you get a developer to say that it was done on purpose, because even if it was, it's fucking stupid. I mean, it's just like that fucking meme about the guy who convinces everybody he's retarded. Then you say that icy peaks give way to the flames of chaos, which is a little inaccurate. You jump down a big hole in the icy kingdom into a fiery pit. It's another one of those don't question how all this comes together moments. But still, not too far from what would realistically be possible in a world of magic. And finally you have this line. It's maddening and majestic at the same time in a way that no concretely designed physical world can ever be. This statement translates to me as, it does not make sense, and a world that does make sense would not be able to not make sense. You've peppered in emotive language, but that's all you really said. Overall, this bit is inaccurate and filled with emotive language to make the theming of Dark Souls 2 seem like it has more going for it, when in reality it is a rehash of the first game without the subtlety, as I have had to keep repeating.
This is imagery. This is visual metaphor. There's doubtless plenty of theory crafting in Souls lore circles about who the woman with the spinning wheel is, when you're told everything you need to know in just how she's presented here. She's deliberately evocative of the fortune-telling spirits with spinning wheels that exist seemingly throughout human mythology and folklore.
Okay, I'm sorry. Now we've changed gears and we're talking about what this one woman might represent. I don't understand the relevance here, but continue.
More specifically, this character appears to be a reference to one of the most popular portrayals of this type of character in film history, the one that appears in Akira Kurosawa's Throne of Blood, also known as Spiderweb Castle. Throne of Blood is an adaptation of Macbeth. In case you haven't heard of Macbeth, Macbeth's about a happy-go-lucky guy whose destiny is to become king. But it turns out being the king isn't all it's cracked up to be. Interestingly enough, right before the character who's a reference to Spiderweb Castle, just to make sure you know they get it, they've just put a spider right there. The appearance of a character seemingly straight out of this film, a film about the darkness befalling people whose destiny is to rule, is a better piece of storytelling than all the item descriptions and all the loot drops in the world.
Okay, so assuming this is a reference, what does this add to the story in Dark Souls 2? And this one particular reference is taking subtlety a bit too far, wouldn't you say? Since barely anyone is going to make this connection, meaning that what it provides as a reference is going to be missed, whether or not it's meaningful. Putting a spider in there could literally just be putting a spider in there. How do you know all of this is true? How do you know the spinner isn't a reference to Disney and its empire with its downfall being inevitable? Secondly, saying that Macbeth is about darkness befalling people whose destiny it is to rule is such a shoehorning of trying to connect Dark Souls and Macbeth, it's unreal. Macbeth is more about the selfish acts of a ruler to remain in power, becoming tyrannical and dying as a result, while Dark Souls is more about clinging to the world you know and love, but realizing that it all fades eventually, as does everything. Obviously, on a broad term, I guess you could connect the stories, but more detailed examinations would show that they are very different stories that share some similarities, as does Dark Souls and Game of Thrones, or Dark Souls and the History of Rome, or Dark Souls and the War of the Roses. Let's not force this, please. You then say that this alone is a better piece of storytelling than any item description or loot drop in the world. I don't know if you're aware of the idea that a reference to another story doesn't tell your own story, but this statement is ludicrous. Many people don't even recognize the reference, and after you've explained it, some don't even see the relevance of it anyway.
But because it relies on understanding of imagery outside of video games and visual storytelling, none of this information can be found on any wiki about the story of the Souls series. In a way, the story of Dark Souls 2 is the ultimate in nerd horror. It tells a story of a universe it's impossible to build a comprehensive fucking wiki about. And to nerds, that's the scariest thing there is.
Nope. The actual reason it isn't on the wiki is because it can't be confirmed. The wikis operate on tangible information. There is speculation on the wiki here and there, but they always have a reference from the game itself. A spinning wheel and a spider isn't really enough, and I think I agree with those who created and maintain the wiki. This one is a bit of a stretch and doesn't offer enough substance even if true. The whole line about how it's impossible to build a wiki about Dark Souls 2 is hilarious because it's nonsensical. There is a comprehensive wiki about it, and it's full of information, but that doesn't change the holes that are in the story being told within the games. Please maintain a form of reality.
This opening proceeds into a series of destroyed castles, ruined thrones, mad, dead kings. When you finally get your own throne, there's a worrying ambivalence to it. The best Dark Souls 1 could muster was having sad music play over the last boss, and if you look at Jimmy's pants, it tells you how bad he was when he was a kid. Dark Souls 2 puts you into the role of the last boss, becoming patriarch of a world on its way to its doom, ultimately failing to achieve anything. And it asks you how you feel about that, and where you go from here.
The opening is a bunch of ruins. Whatever you read into with this is down to you. And more importantly, if you are genuinely summarizing one of the most heartfelt and meaningful moments in the Dark Souls series like that, then I don't think you understood the game. I've only done it to Dark Souls 2 to prove that you can do it to anything, but if you keep summarizing the game like it's meaningless while inventing your own meaning for Dark Souls 2, then surely it's only a matter of time before you realize how much of a hypocrite you're actually being. You end this mini-section by saying that Dark Souls 2 puts you in the role of the last boss, becoming patriarch of a world on its way to its doom, ultimately failing to achieve anything, and it asks how you feel about that. The fact that you think Dark Souls 1 didn't do this, again, tells me you didn't understand the subtlety of the storytelling in the game, and that's a huge shame. You took Gwyn's place, you performed the very mistake he did, or you threw it all away and embraced the Age of Dark. Just watch Vatividya for Christ's sake, Harris.
Pacing of Dark Souls 1 wasn't great after the Lord Vessel, but it did a lot more with a lot less when it came to its plot. Its introductory video set up the world and the major players very efficiently.
Efficient storytelling is being placed over good storytelling, or even a good story. I think gamers on the whole are still kind of enamored with a Wikipedia-style approach to storytelling where everything can be concretely pieced together in an objective narrative, when really I think there's a lot of other ways you can explore a story.
Why does the story have to be efficient or good? Why can't it be both? On top of that, it isn't gamers who like things to make sense, it's humans. What you clearly don't understand, Harris, is that you like the story because it makes sense to you. The absolute myriad of issues sends you a message of incompleteness with the title, "This is incomplete, and that's what makes it complete," which makes sense to you. The rest of us are simply confused and frustrated by it being incomplete. Saying that there are other ways to explore a story and only having said that the theme is repeated and an old lady is a reference to an old film about a king is hardly representative of opening your mind, since we could all sit for days pointing at splats of mud on the floor and saying they reference anything we want. Concrete storytelling always wins because we know what the message was and we can appreciate the construction, the time, the effort, the talent, all of that behind it. When the story is scrambled with pieces missing and the justification is it's better this way, you should probably realize why it is you have to argue that to so many people, rather than that being the way that all of the greatest stories are told.
The intro video to Dark Souls 2 shows the main character dropping into some kind of whirlpool, because the old lady tells us we're cursed, and the only hope of a cure is to go to Drang Lake for some reason. She actually says we'll have no idea why we're going to do any of the stuff we're about to do.
Okay, so this is why he went so crazy into the old lady bit that we were talking about. You know, it was really weird that he picked that alone in the entire game to talk about some crazy reference that none of us saw. It's because Matthew Matosis just called her an old lady instead of appreciating the fact that, you know, there's some huge story behind it. I mean, hell, we gotta get some more criticisms into Matthew Matosis, don't we? So let's tackle what he said. Matthew Matosis is spot on. The opening tells us that we have the curse of the undead and we will lose everything eventually without remembering it and we won't even care. With a family shown to give us an idea of what she's talking about. Then she says we're going to turn up at the gate of Drang Lake Castle and not know why. Then we plummet into a whirlpool. What is this whirlpool? Why are there skulls and smoke coming out of it? Who is she? Is she hollow too? Do we trust her? Why is Drang Lake where we are going? Why hasn't our character heard of Drang Lake? What the hell's going on? You're left with nothing but to assume this is all metaphor and there is no vehicle this time, nothing to grasp. This world is literally just saying, go.
This visual metaphor for falling into darkness, you know, the thing that going hollow does to your mind, is reduced to falling into some kind of whirlpool.
That is some kind of whirlpool, which is literally what it is. What it is figuratively is anyone's fucking guess, since that shit is subjective.
A woman visually coded as having the power to see the future, predicting a horrible fate in which we do things without fully understanding their purpose because we lose our minds, is reduced to the old lady telling us to go to Drang Lake for some reason.
She is literally an old lady. She says we end up in Drang Lake, but we won't know why. Figuratively, she can reference whatever the hell you want from 1950s, Harris. What do you even mean by visually coded? Did you really just say that instead of reference?
No wonder this critical approach to storytelling resulted in finding the story lacking.
No, this is just an old lady telling us to do things for some reason. There's no nuance or meaning or cinematic language being utilized here. That level of understanding has no place in my nuanced critique of a video game.
You've literally done that with Dark Souls 1 throughout your video, reducing moments of heartfelt triumph and sorrow to nothing.
The closest you get to a story is a guy saying ring some bells, run around a mostly empty world, killing the people who remain so they can open a big door. The guys I'm going to kill killed a bunch of dragons a long time ago, and that's important. Gwyn wasn't cool at all. He was really rude, kill his friends, having sad music play over the last boss, and if you look at Jimmy's pants, it tells you how bad he was when he was a kid.
How is this any different from your approach? Whether Matthew wanted to include every figurative meaning for that opening in his video is up to him, but he chose to stick to what was objective. It turns out if you listen to the old lady before you jump into the fucking whirlpool, she says a bunch of shit that doesn't make any sense. However, if we simply go with figuratively falling down a spiral of decay after talking to some elder wise person, it's all on the nose. If you look at this as character dialogue, however, it doesn't make sense. Besides that, are you going to comment on the slew of criticisms that Matthew brought up about the intro aside from the old lady in the whirlpool? I mean, fucking hell, he's made like 100 points in his video and you've responded to what, 3? And your goal was to, what was it again? Destroy the video?
It is necessary that this critique be defeated and destroyed at all costs.
He even makes several criticisms about the inherent effect it has on being an RPG to establish your character before you've even chosen to customize them and create your own history. The tone of the intro is completely out of phase with the game itself, setting you up for some heavy, mentally scarring realizations, but then comically talking about losing your souls and how that's going to be so frustrating. Speaking of which, the memes of dying in this game crop up all over the introduction, and it's extremely off-putting in terms of immersion. But what about the fact that it shafts female players from even having a say about their character's orientation in the opening? This is something a staunch feminist such as yourself would likely have a huge problem with if you weren't heavily concerned with defending the game regardless of its flaws. I actually think you chose to ignore these issues because they're undefendable, but as we draw closer to the end of your video, there's going to be a hell of a lot more of those arguments coming from me.
New Game Plus is the bad ending. You press a button and admit that all that's left is for everything to happen again. There's another ending, which came out when all the DLCs had come out and also adds a new character. I think this aspect of the story is interesting in its own way, but I don't like how people use it as an excuse to criticize Dark Souls 2, pretending there wasn't enough story in the initial release and this is an admission of that and they're finally fixing it, or they're patching the story in post or something.
New Game Plus is the bad ending? As we've established, it just resets the game, which is inevitable, just like the first game. You say it's about admitting there's nothing left to do but for everything to happen again, which, if this is a video game, it's the only thing that can ever happen. As to them patching the story in, they literally patched in another ending to the game, allowing the player to choose, which is something they took away. The developers have now changed the story from the game from what it originally was. They've patched in new content that finished the story the way they wanted. Remember, Director's Cut Definitive Edition. So they clearly thought the story was lacking or they would not have done that. It is very simple and obvious that having the choice to walk away was important to players, and so they edited this story to have that be an option. Uldir was already established, he simply wasn't created yet. They needed more time, but they had to stick to a schedule, or they wanted to split a part of the game off and sell it, but who's judging? I know you don't like it when people criticize the game in any way, Harris, but this is one of the myriad of problems the game faces in each of its major and minor aspects. You can't just say you don't like that people are criticizing it.
There's plenty of story, but just not the kind everyone wanted. For me, it was already complete in its incompleteness, but giving the player the option of getting an ending where they beat another boss and walk out is a nice little bonus. It's a nice extra little thing to give people, and that's alright.
So there we have it, that's the end of the story section, and he literally finished it off with saying that the story not being complete was how it was complete, and people who didn't like it were simply unable to appreciate that kind of story. There is a strong trend throughout this video that I'm sure everyone has noticed by now, that is, if you point to things that are out of place and nonsensical in an otherwise consistent and grounded project, and tell your audience that those things are not negatives but positives that add to the entire title itself, it comes across as a little bit weird. When someone creates a scale talking about how they justify and identify things that are well made and constructed with so much detail and purpose, they eventually have to accept things that sit strictly on the bad parts of the scale by its own rules. I enjoy the heck out of Batman Forever and Batman and Robin for how goofy the whole thing is, but they are terribly made films in many aspects. You are not going to catch me making nonsensical arguments in a video titled In Defense of Joel Schumacher. You can talk about why you enjoy them, you can talk about why you think the objective criticisms aren't that bad in retrospect, but what you can't do is take those objective issues and use the rules of things not making sense to justify them as great design choices. Hell, I have to explain this every single video in case anyone forgets and thinks of me as some asshole, which I am. But there is a difference between subjective and objective. Conflating them makes everything so much more difficult to understand. His closing argument in response to the idea that the DLC is tacked on is that it's a nice little extra thing to give people, and that's alright. I'm not sure how to respond to that, considering whenever he describes something as nice or cool or neat, as far as I'm concerned, he's already insulted it more than I could. But I think it is telling that he's trying to describe something that everyone thinks is terrible, and the best he can do is say the content is nice. Regardless, that about does it for the story section and another round of shitting on Matthew Matosis for good measure. I hope you've all been enjoying this. We are now faced with about 2 parts remaining. Thank you ever so much for watching, folks, and I will see you next time.
Alright, let's just go right into it. I do think he's correct, though. I mean, the stories are basically the same. I just think that Dark Souls 1 as well does it better. And I'm not really sure. It's nice to think that Drangleic takes place in Lordaeron, but I don't think it does. I think it takes place away from Lordaeron, whatever it's called. I don't think it's in the same place. That's my perception anyway. I think that they are 2 different locations, and that's why there's very few references to Dark Souls 2 in Dark Souls 3. Now, in the Ringed City, when all of the places are converging on one another, and you go through Earthen Peak, yeah, I would say having some Dark Souls 2 references in there would suffice, because the entire world is cascading on itself in the Ringed City.
was interesting. Calm. Don't get angry.
It was already complete in its incompleteness.
Last video, y'all. Very last video.
I think maybe the over-the-top dislikes some fans
While the
exhibited towards
intro's going,
Dark
I'm gonna
Souls
go to
2
the
caused the
bathroom.
developers to walk back on ideas that were genuinely better.
Okay, I could spend a good deal of this video defending Dark Souls 2. In fact, I'm going to compile a video looking at the central complaints about it, and why all of them are wrong and lies from criminals, and I'm going to put that up in a separate video a bit later on. When that comes up, I'll put the link here. So, okay, cool. Back to Bloodborne.
Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the very next part of my series responding to H-Bomberguy. Today we're moving on to the next part, which is about the DLC and Scholar of the First Sin. So there is nothing but positive talk about the DLC for Dark Souls 2 from the Dark Souls 2 fans. I think they see the DLC as something that is flawless, while the main game is something they have to accept things like ADP, hitboxes,
So we're talking about Scholar
world
of the
building,
First Sin now?
etc. Which I know I've only mentioned one of those three in this series so far. But that's because I've only been responding to Harris, and this very video is the last time we'll be doing that. The problem is that there are blaring issues that are solely a part of the DLC, and ones that are present thanks to the main game's fundamental design flaws. Regardless, let's hear the arguments for why the DLC is good.
The DLC to Dark Souls 2 is fantastic. Each one experiments with mechanics in cool and interesting ways I don't want to get too far into because we're already pressed for time. Rest assured they're all lengthy enough to feel like worthwhile additions. I'll rattle off the fun stuff I really liked. I like Broom Tower's verticality and the way you unlocked more access from the central hub once you got the key wedge thing.
So we start off with the point, the DLC is fantastic. This will be interesting to see if proven. Next up, he undercuts his own analysis significantly by saying that he doesn't want to go too far in because he's pressed for time. Pressed for time? I would never have thought to hear that from you, Harris. You're easily one of the strongest people on YouTube for allowing whatever time is necessary to take its form for the message to be as concrete as possible. Honestly, it's why my series are so long. It's people like you that kind of convince me that it's more about the message being clear and strong rather than making sure you hit a particular time. Perhaps not anymore then, I suppose. He says they are all long enough to be considered worthy additions. I am happy to agree on that. They can be pretty long, and there's no doubt that most people want that in a DLC. And then he said he liked Broom Tower's verticality. This is not to be confused with Dark Souls 1 verticality, in which everything conjoined on different elevations and intertwined in both the horizontal and vertical manner, having connections that flow in all directions, including diagonally. Broom Tower's verticality refers to it being one long, tall structure with offshoots leading to different areas, which essentially amounts to the usual level design but turned upwards instead and containing a lot more detail. However, he is welcome to like that.
I like Crown of the Old Iron King's gimmick of having the first boss and the Iron King himself be just to your left when you come in. And you can take a series of looping paths around to make the first boss visible, then go around again once the ice melts to gain access to more soldiers for the Old Iron King fight. You could find and build a little army to help you even out the odds, and that's really cool.
So once again, he states that this is his opinion, and that's absolutely fine, but let's check it out.
And
He
that's
lets
really
slip that there is
cool.
a gimmick in each of the DLC, and that is true. What it means is that each DLC has a method of lengthening the time that you spend there. Broom Tower forces the player to return back and forth throughout the tower once they find certain keys in order to complete each of the boss fights, and dissolve each of the statues with the smelter wedge. Had all the doors been unlocked from the get-go, the DLC would have been much shorter. Shulver forces the player to make use of rising and falling platforms while navigating a maze with doors that open and close based on buttons, in order to loop you all the way back around to the beginning, and go through another maze in order to reach the double boss fight. Had the place not been filled with 100 possible paths and 97 dead ends from the get-go, the DLC may have been much shorter. Perhaps the most heinous example, however, is the remaining DLC, Elium Lois. The gimmick here is to force the player to approach the entire land twice with a possibility for 3 times depending on your explorative skills. This is because they have arbitrary blocks up from the beginning. Had all of the exits been open from the get-go, the DLC would have been much shorter. Dark Souls 2's DLCs have tried their best to find ways to extend the content they have within them at all costs. You reapproach the exact same world and have access to content that was simply limited in the first place. This is why I do not enjoy the gimmicks. I consider them weak in some cases and completely arbitrary in others from a gameplay standpoint. Harris describes that process in Ilium Lois as really cool, despite the fact that you really don't have a choice but to search the land once again to find the assistants for the boss fight, as without them the fight is ridiculously difficult, which to me does not scream player freedom whatsoever. However, since he began this section saying "I like," we can just let him have the opinion. That's fine.
I like the puzzles that require you to actually use a bow to progress. The Souls games, when it comes down to it, are something of an offshoot from Zelda, and its attempt to bring some honest-to-God bow and arrow puzzles to the game. It was unexpected, but it fit together quite well. I like these ghost guys who look like phantoms you see online. It actually trips you up when you discover they're real and they attack you. It makes for a cool fake out I just spoiled for you, so I hope you already played this bit.
And there we go, I like is here once again. So it is entirely his opinion, and that's fine. It's never good when a Souls game requires the use of a specific build, but at least here they provide it to you as a way of underhandedly forcing the gimmick. In addition, saying that Dark Souls is an offshoot from Zelda is simply ridiculous to me. These games are so far removed from each other that the comparison almost feels like pandering. Hey guys, remember that game that you like? That's really popular? It's like the most popular game ever. Well, you know the game you like now? They're both similar, so...
In many respects, it is the previous generation's Ocarina of Time. Not just because both games have similar gameplay and fantasy settings, but because they provoke similar reactions when critiqued, that they are unwilling to
Joseph Anderson did the same thing, and one of his legitimate evidences was that you climb a ladder in both games. Just because you fire an arrow in third-person video games to solve a puzzle doesn't mean you are now playing Zelda. Yet he says the whole bow shooting thing, puzzle solving, fits quite well. This is highly subjective, I suppose. I found that it was just so jarringly gimmicky that I knew that I would be relieved the moment they stopped providing platform-based puzzling in a game with terribly bad platforming to begin with. Oh dear, I'm so sorry. Did all of you think that the platforming in Dark Souls was well put together? Platforming was annoying and bad in Dark Souls 1 because of how weak and hard to control the jumping is, combined with the way that you have to be strictly above the platform with your whole body, otherwise you won't make it. On top of that, you roll upon finishing the jump, which can lead to death.
So, I will critique that though. I think you don't roll upon finishing a land if you're not holding the L thumbstick. If you're holding it forward, you'll roll forward. If you're not holding it when you land, you'll land in place. And if you don't, then you can always immediately stop what you're doing by hitting the right bumper, so that you do a plunging attack and basically, well, actually not basically, literally, don't roll. So you can get around that. You just have to know how to do it.
Since every platforming section is usually surrounded by pits, but even getting back to the asylum has one of the most dodgy jumps in the series in Dark Souls 1. I really wish that Dark Souls 2 didn't have full-on platforming sections, because it once again feels like they're experimenting for experiment's sake. Not playing to the series' strengths, just fucking around with mechanics that are seriously not developed whatsoever. Maybe it would be better if the Dark Souls man could hang off ledges, but he can't. Maybe it would be better.
Also, don't forget that, and I think this was the way it was all the way until Dark Souls 3, that your run button and your jump button are the same one. You can only jump if you're running and then immediately release and press B again. And if you do it like half a fraction too slow, you end up dodging, and so you just roll to your death usually.
Better if we just stopped doing platform sections, but they didn't. Maybe it would be better if they improved the movement, but they made it far more clunky in Dark Souls 2, and I know I've just triggered at least one person, so we're going to be getting back to that argument in the next part, as I don't want to go too far off topic. The point is, platforming in the Souls games sucks. Stop making us do it. Anyway, moving right along. Harris weirdly has this whole assessment of the ghost dudes in the crypt area while sharing how interesting it is that you would have mistaken them for ghosts, and he is sorry for spoiling that. Even though they already tried that in the main game and it was annoying as hell, but also that these guys don't look anything like other players. Why would you reasonably assume that these are ghosts of other players? They're way too big. But besides that, they just stay still. Like, this is the way they're introduced to the player. It's as gods. that you have to avoid or find a way to kill. I think he wanted to say something good about them and just ran dry outside of the obvious. Even I could have said something more substantial, like it's interesting that you essentially need to find their power source and destroy it before they destroy you, or something like that. But he kind of copped out here, or he completely forgot that this gimmick has been used already, again showing his own knowledge of the game.
Sin the Slumbering Dragon is a hard fight, but the first really fun fight with a dragon in basically any of these games for me personally, especially after the optional Ancient Dragon fight, which is honestly a chore. In many ways, the DLC embodies Dark Souls 2 in microcosm, being willing to go all the way and experimenting with its mechanics to create new and unique areas, and in doing so, it also comes to embody the very best the Souls series has to offer as a whole.
So everything about Sin was subjective, as he said, for me personally, but again, I would like to explore some stuff. First, he calls it a hard fight, which is obviously subjective, but if you have life gems, which at this point should be stacked at 99 easily, then it is far from difficult, as you simply need to outlast him, and since you almost have infinite health, you'll be fine. Secondly, he says that it is the first really fun fight with a dragon. If you want a hard and fun fight with a dragon, Calamite is your guy, but at least he admitted to the Ancient Dragon being incredibly dull, which is an understatement for that horrid...
And Dark Souls 3 hadn't come out yet, I think, when H-Bomber made his video, but the final optional boss of the DLC of Dark Souls 3, the Ring City, has an enemy called Midir, I think, a dragon called Midir, who you fight in, I think, one of the biggest arenas Dark Souls has. That is another exceptional fight with a dragon. Calmeet was another fantastic optional fight with dragons. It's just unfortunate that most of the dragons in these games are not happy to see you. But why would they be? Because you were one of the descendants of the thing that paired with other things and killed them for sport.
Boss. Next up, he says that the DLC for Dark Souls 2 embodies the game in microcosm, which I agree with. It focuses on annoying gimmicks and changes from its prequel, with broken fundamentals and landscapes made difficult by convoluted locks forcing you to make roundabout runs through it, and subsequently horribly balanced enemies. Enemies with high health, high damage, high agility, high numbers, etc. Harris, on the other hand, considers it all unique and new. He then says it embodies the very best the Souls games have to offer, while supporting that statement with barely anything.
It's everything that I think I ever wanted from a Souls game, and it's part of Dark Souls 2, so Dark Souls 2 wins.
So he said it was everything he wanted and Dark Souls 2 wins, while saying that the Squalid Queen fight is the best two-person fight. Which, I mean, the best two-person fight's obviously the Twin Dragon Riders in reality. They're way more evidence and reason. And there it is. The DLC section is over. That was so jarring to analyze and respond to because this is the crux of every Dark Souls 2 advocate's argument, explaining in full what the DLCs offer and how they make up for the main game and push it past Dark Souls 1, yet Harris brushes over them so fast you kind of lose any kind of understanding that they are even relevant. The analysis of the DLC constitutes 1.5 minutes of his 80-minute video about why Dark Souls 2 is good. This is why people wanted someone else defending the game. Harris is blissfully unaware of the strengths of Dark Souls 2. He gets it confused with its blatant weaknesses. But don't worry, I'm going to cover them in full as we progress past this video. Ultimately, it would seem that Harris rushed this segment for the sake of making a more digestible video, but this is a bizarre comment coming from him, considering that he would usually make a two-parter or more of a video series, or hell, make it 1 million parts like I do. But more importantly, anyone remember when he said this once upon a time?
Good criticism means good discourse. I can completely see why writers, critics, and journalists use the shorthands they do, but I think the onus is on us to try not to. To be willing to be long, complicated, willing to be, even a little bit boring or pedantic at times in order to explore the qualities of gaming experiences in a truly valuable way.
What happened to that principle? To take as long as is needed to explain to your audience the reasoning and experience behind the content and how it was made for that. It's honestly something I really want to stick to myself, and one of the most common criticisms I receive on Reddit for my videos is that they're too long, but once people actually give them a shot, that criticism suddenly fucking evaporates. I don't know what Harris was thinking with this move, but we are gonna swiftly move on ourselves to Scholar of the First Sin now, and this is where it gets really funny.
Scholar of the First Sin is a second edition of Dark Souls 2 that came out nearly 2 years ago now. It bundled together the DLCs for the original release of the game, had some graphical and performance updates, and put the items that grant access to the DLC in the world itself as things to find instead of items you simply start with if you owned the DLC in the previous version.
Well, he is right about all of that, but I have already summarized why it's an extremely shady business practice, and for some reason Harris doesn't seem to care, despite even Joseph Anderson weighing in on the subject.
$25 for some revamped enemies and a few graphical upgrades that bring it closer to the quality first advertised in their reveal trailers. This goes beyond greed.
This is very important to keep in mind because of how ridiculous this section gets.
This version's really interesting. I'm not going to say good, interesting. Instead of a simple, slightly visually improved bundle, it actually
Not good,
dramatically changes
interesting.
most of the game. Almost all of the enemy encounters and placements have been altered, and the amount of enemies has overall...
I love. I'm not gonna say good. I'm gonna say interesting. But this is in defense of Dark Souls 2. You're supposed to make it sound good, not interesting. Good. You want to make something that people say is bad good because you are defending the game. The fuck? Amazing. Absolutely amazing.
increased massively. I've played Dark Souls 2 multiple times before playing this version, and I found it to be very different and much harder, despite superficially being the same game.
He says the version is interesting, but he refuses to label it as good. Now that should give you a strong impression of how much of a terrible addition to the series it was. Don't get me wrong, there was a ton of issues with Dark Souls 2 at the base, but this additional game added all of the shady business changes, but also just random enemies here and there to add nothing in terms of content, just more difficulty, more things. Harris says it dramatically changed the game, altering every enemy encounter. This is not true. There are several that are reduced or added or swapped, but the games themselves can often be mistaken for the same without a careful eye. This next statement, though, is another burn against Scholar in that he says the game is very different despite superficially being the same. Basically, they didn't change anything of note. There wasn't a better experience to be had. They just arbitrarily threw in and took out enemies regardless of the context to convince players that they were playing a new game or a definitive version of Dark Souls 2. Like, I don't know if this is getting through to you. It's pretty fucking disgusting to take your existing game, to change a bunch of spawns and then sell it as a new game. Of course, the more significant details like 1080p and 60 FPS are significant changes, but they should not be in another fucking release.
It's more frustrating too. A lot of people didn't like the amount of enemies you often fight at once in Dark Souls 2, something I didn't have a problem with in that game, but in this it's definitely difficult enough to be annoying even if you know how to deal with groups in this engine.
Now he's admitting that there is indeed spam in Scholar but not in Dark Souls 2. How does he qualify it? He won't, but he makes it clear that the base game is fine and it's testing crowd control while Scholar is a victim of spam. Unless you qualify it, I would say your distinction is arbitrary. Spam takes place heavily in both games, there's no doubt.
Honestly, the game this reminds me of the most is Super Mario Bros. 2. The Japanese Mario 2 is like an optional harder Mario game, pushing the engine and player skill requirements to the absolute limit before it becomes unsellable as a consumer product. Heck, they didn't even bother selling it in the West for a reason.
I'm sorry, but to justify Scholar, you're comparing it to a game that was stopped from being sold to massive amounts of audiences because it was assumed to be unplayable. Someone remind me, how in the hell is this a defense for Dark Souls 2 at this point?
I'd call Scholar a pretty good game. It's challenging, it's entertainingly funny in places, and it's a nice way of playing a game I love dearly in a
Entertainably
new,
funny?
remixed way. However, I have to qualify calling it good. It's good only within the context of Dark Souls 2 already existing, of there being about a year of playing the original version to prepare for this one. I would not recommend this game to anyone as a first game in the series, which for some people this might have saddeningly been.
He begrudgingly calls Scholar of the First Sin a pretty good game, and that it's funny in places, but he doesn't provide an example of that, nor does he explain what that even means. But then he describes Dark Souls 2 as a game he loves dearly, which should actually reveal the motivation for this video entirely, and it doubles as explanation on why this video is filled with emotional responses to arguments, as compared to his better content. He has been basing concrete conclusions on subjective evidence and experience. He then hilariously asserts that you shouldn't play Scholar unless you have at least a year of Dark Souls 2 under your belt, that people who play it as their first series is something he wouldn't recommend. He doesn't really specify why in any kind of detail, but I think it's more to do with the fact that he doesn't want to criticize his dear love any more than he already has. The reality is that this thing is marketed to customers as the complete edition, the director's cut, the definitive edition, the perfect time to play Dark Souls 2, the game to bring Game of the Year to a whole new level, with the gameplay of Dark Souls 2 but refined and improved. Even though half of its features were provided provided to the base game owners, that being the new boss, the new lore, the new item descriptions, the improved matchmaking, but half were arbitrarily placed behind a paywall, such as 1080p, 60 FPS, new enemy placements, new AI, the ability to have more players to play together, not to mention that the games run on DirectX 9 and DirectX 11 respectively, which means it causes major issues for those who want to play together, and it creates different sources of support for both. This is the kind of shit you should be giving players at the base. Who the fuck cares about getting Aldir as a boss compared to playing in 60 FPS? Needless to say, if you check the Scholar trailers on YouTube, the comment sections are filled with hatred for the developers and their business choices, as they should be, and Harris is not going to be telling you about any of this. There was heavy controversy in the original release for Dark Souls 2, being that of lighting differences, changes in development as the time went on, and not to mention that there was a particular set of masks that everybody wanted that never showed up in the way that they were presented. Anybody who's a remote fan of the Souls series and looked after Dark Souls 2 when this was all going on would know a lot about this. And yet it doesn't pop up here. He instead has an extremely milquetoast assessment of the content in hopes that you will come along to the side that, hey, this was all ages ago, we can appreciate the content for what it is now, right? Anyone who has concern for the consumer and retains any sort of principle when it comes to developer decisions should be condemning Dark Souls 2 and From Software for the choices surrounding Dark Souls 2 as a whole. But why don't you tell us again who this content is for, Harris?
It's for people who are diehard fans of the series already, or even just fans of 2 specifically, and for those people, even when it's not fun, it's fun as an entertaining little experiment with a bunch of aspects of the game tweaked just enough. It feels almost like a ROM hack of Dark Souls 2 they made for fun, and for some people that might be a condemnation, especially considering it's the cost of a full-priced game. So I can't heartily recommend it, but the Souls games are quite difficult to recommend already.
I'm afraid that you're wrong. As we've discussed already, it is intended for gamers to play as the intended Dark Souls 2 experience directly from the developers as a completed work. Now your argument is that it is good if you look at it from a ROM hack or an experiment perspective. This is clearly where the argument has begun to buckle under the pressure of the quality of the content. He is having a huge amount of trouble trying to say anything good about this, but for the sake of the narrative he cannot criticize it or condemn it either. He then shows a sliver of honesty and admits that at the least it's a full price charge while being an extremely similar game. Of course he is forgetting that those who own Dark Souls 2 get the discount, but hey, sucks when I have to break my narrative and defend Dark Souls 2 for him, right?
Something I like specifically is the entrance to the Earthen Peak from Harvest Valley. There's a couple of enemies in the original, but it seems quite underutilized, like it's a short, quick rush through an area that could be more fleshed out. In Scholar it's significantly altered. There's way more enemies, it's way more difficult, there's purposeful traps for if you try and run past, and it has more enemy types that appear in like 2 places in the original game, which is nice.
Well, the arguments for the quality and changes are not over. Now we're talking about how they added more things in an area and repeated assets in order to make something, according to Harris, more fleshed out and nice. I think you can tell when he's running out of steam because his language falters to the point of describing things as cool, nice, neat, interesting, rather than explaining why this is the case. He's mostly twisting the perspective of simply adding more enemies here, but he says it's something he likes, so it's fine.
There are also more Heidi Knights in general, which is great, and something I wanted. And also they're way more aggressive. Some of them get up and go for you now, and that's a really cool thing that you just don't expect if you play the original, and that's really, really fun.
This is getting ridiculous now. The Hyde Knights were removed from several spots in the original game and placed into Hyde's Tower of Flame. There wasn't a significant increase in numbers in the entire game, and again, he shows he doesn't play his own game that thoroughly. There are only 2 Hyde Knights that attack you in the opening area, and they're both close to the Guardian Dragon copy and paste. No other Hyde Knights will engage you without being provoked, but after you kill the Dragon Rider, they all aggro towards you in this area. Overall, these are arbitrary changes that Harris has deemed cool and fun, that often serve to frustrate people immensely as the fight pattern on the Hyde Knights themselves are horribly telegraphed. This, while combining the fact that the enemies are quite tough and aggressive and aggro to you from far away, makes the whole area pretty difficult to be honest, but that's kind of throughout the game without life gems.
Also, something I quite like about both games is that in each one, someone's credentials are called into question. In the original, in Heidi's Tower, the Dragon Rider looked like an idiot. There were no dragons anywhere for most of the game. Why is he called the Dragon Rider? What? That's ridiculous. The guy's obviously lying. But in Scholar, it's the Dragon Slayer just over the way from him who's clearly lying on his resume. There's a dragon right outside his fucking office.
I don't actually have anything to say about this. I honestly, I've kept it in for the sake of context, but I think he's just running out of things to talk about at this point.
Don't get the Scholar Edition unless you similarly really like 2 already, and don't approach it as its own game per se, but as another way of playing a game you already liked for what it was doing, and you'll probably have a good time. I honestly want to see more games like this. I would have liked a similar edition along these lines for
I
every
love
Souls
that. You'll
game, to be
probably
honest.
have a
So
good
he offers
time.
his opinion on when you should play Scholar of the First Sin, which is fine. Personally, I would not recommend playing either of the games if you have a high standard when it comes to video game construction, as you will be frustrated and disappointed with many of the elements throughout the game. As one of my subscribers put it, Dark Souls 2 and all content associated with it is a literal garbage fire, and that really seems poignant to me, but that will yet to be proven in the final part. Regardless, Harris says he would like to see the attitudes of Scholar for the rest of the Souls series, and he is dangerously wrong about this. Do not encourage the practices of reselling a game at the performance it was supposed to have at launch. Do not support a developer without a conscience. It will only serve to bite you in the ass one day, and you'll be saving yourself the trouble. Do not listen to Harris on this. I'm not even talking about opinions anymore. This is just fucking stupid. Do not encourage shit like Scholar of the First Sin to happen in the future. Regardless, this is the end of the section on DLC and Scholar of the First Sin, and Harris has rather disingenuously bungled it together to place one of the worst parts of the development of the game and one of the best to level them out, I suppose. Scholar is a blatant attempt at making more money, and I couldn't really sum it up better than Joseph Anderson did.
This goes beyond greed.
Now we come to Harris's conclusion, and this is more about the perception of games journalism towards the game, its process, and why Dark Souls 2 ended up with the reputation that it did.
Obviously, a lot of game criticism is based on subjective experience, which can't exactly be proven wrong, sadly, but that's not what I'm trying to do here. My aim as a critic isn't just to try and find ways of looking at and analysing games and their design that are useful and help in forming better ideas of quality, but also to try and understand and explain why other people reacted differently.
Okay, so he says that a lot of games criticism is subjective, and he is bang on the money. When you have Joseph Anderson telling you that parts of Dark Souls aren't fun, or parts of Soma aren't interesting or scary, it is objectively provable that he is taking a subjective experience and passing it off as a fact. This is bad writing, but it would ultimately be called subjective, regardless. When I tell you that the motivation in Outlast doesn't make a lot of sense and that they treat moving from certain areas to others as a ride, I will explain that it can have a detrimental effect on your immersion as a player, and ultimately this would be up to you to decide how much it bothers you personally, but I would still bring it to your attention. This would be objective analysis with reference to a subjective experience. This is pretty much my goal on YouTube, to provide a better caliber of analysis to those who are currently on offer, to delve far deeper to the content and build a scale for it. I am willing to accept that I still make a huge amount of mistakes in the language I use, and honestly I am getting there in terms of reaching a state where I stop pissing people off in the comments section. But for now I can settle for simply doing a more thorough job than most of these fucking people. These guys will assert that they are objective and analytical, showing holes in other people's logic or arguments and showing the game to be something that everyone else missed, but then the communities follow suit and talk about how everything is subjective and so it is fine. Like I said in the beginning, this is a myth. There are many objective things to say about many forms of design involved with a game. What these things do in terms of a final product judgment is completely different to what emotion it may elicit from someone personally. The point here is that Harris said that people can't exactly be proven wrong, but this video series stands as what happens when you put massive effort into fact-checking and discussing the ideas of your average YouTube intellectual, of which I am very much a part of, but my work isn't good because I'm smart or anything, it's good because I put time in, and that's what actually matters. Judging from the armor he's wearing in the footage and what weapons he uses, it looks like he played Dark Souls 2 maybe twice. He skipped Dark Lurker, several important builds, and didn't even try to explore the negatives of the game to provide a balance. This video of his was rushed. It may have taken him long compared to other videos in his YouTube channel, but for the content we're covering, it was rushed, and he's made a plethora of mistakes, thus proving much of his subjective analysis to be inaccurate. He then comically asserts that he isn't just looking to inform better ideas when it comes to design, he's also looking to learn from those who disagree, which I'm afraid is fucking bizarre considering how he's been responding to Matthew Matosis. Harris has misunderstood much of the source material from both games, as well as completely misrepresenting his peers. He didn't want to learn from Matthew Matosis. In fact, I believe his intentions were very clear.
It is necessary that this critique be defeated and destroyed at all costs.
Regardless of that, let's push on.
I've had some pushback from people on some of my long game analysis videos, usually by people who enjoyed a game I was being critical about, or didn't enjoy a game I liked, or who played the game a way I said was wrong and happened to like it. I in no way mean to diminish other people's experiences of a game. If you didn't like something, I can't reason you into liking it. My aim is to understand why people do or don't like something and learn from that and use the information in my work.
He says he received pushback for his work, which makes a lot of sense because Harris makes very controversial videos with a certain level of smugness that can very much anger people. Put that with the fact that he has now dealt a very controversial hit to Matthew Matosis, and his reputation gets a little more contentious as time goes on. There are a myriad of reasons his audience disagrees with him, some justified, some are not, but this applies to many content creators and doesn't really have relevance here because of what he is leading up to saying.
I in no way mean to diminish other people's experiences of a game.
It is really hard to listen to him say this because of the absolute hypocrisy his video displays. The fact that he will often and loudly explain that people don't understand the simple truth, or go as far as saying people play the game wrong. He'll do all of that but turn around and say he respects the analysis and would never diminish another person's experience. Is that really true?
I in no way mean to diminish other people's experiences of a game. This looks a whole lot like playing the game wrong and blaming the game for it. I in no way mean to diminish other people's experiences of a game. And he's still using a shield. Oh, bless. Someone really liked the previous games and tried real hard not to unlearn what they learned there.
Totally not diminishing in any way. He claims that he just wants to understand why people feel the way they do, which normally would be fine, but he still hasn't addressed the majority of Matthew Matosis' video's criticisms despite saying he wants the video destroyed. Seriously, he wants to destroy the video in terms of argumentation, and yet he's tackled about 2% of it. And even those points were misrepresented.
I've gone on record as thinking the Souls games are all very good, but that doesn't make other people not liking them or not thinking that wrong. They're useful because you learn why people wouldn't enjoy something, and that's really helpful if you, for example, are interested in what makes a game fun to a lot of people, which is really financially lucrative nowadays.
Harris then talks about how opinions work, but I have to say I disagree here. If someone says they personally like something and they won't be changing their mind, that's fine. If someone says a game is bad in fundamental design aspects, when it is proven to be good, that would make them wrong. Subjective versus objective. This is something I'm going to continue to push on my channel because I honestly think it's a problem in modern conversation. And it has nothing to do with some kind of obsession with proving my opinions correct. It's about creating a scale where we can all be on the same page and understand a product's quality but appreciate the experiences you can gain from it. It isn't a smart idea for a YouTube channel to be saying that there is such a thing as objectively good and bad video games, but my group of viewers are small, so I don't have to worry about pissing off hordes, and we can talk about it in the comments section if you guys would like. That's absolutely fine. My issue is we aren't going to get anywhere in discussion if we can't agree on the idea that things can be done well or not, and how to identify those things. This is something Harris will employ in his other videos, but sometimes he lets it loose and calls for subjectivity when the product is harder to defend or harder to criticize. Weirdly, he makes a point about financial benefits of talking about video games. Now, I have no idea what he's implying about people's motivations there, but I don't understand how it could possibly not be turned around on himself as well, so let's just ignore it.
I feel the game's got better at correcting the sort of problems that caused not a lot of people to enjoy them early on, at least without a lot of friction at the start, and somewhat interestingly, help them go back and appreciate the previous ones. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, and in my opinion, every other game critic is stupid.
He makes the point that newer Souls games have been able to correct issues in which people weren't enjoying them as much before and allow people to go back and appreciate the others. This again comes from that one friend he has, and to counter, I have over 4 friends I could name that have openly admitted that Dark Souls 2 made them appreciate how good Dark Souls 1 is and that Dark Souls 2 was awfully constructed. These are both anecdotal and honestly get in the way of the conversation. I guess they're interesting though. He then says everyone can have their opinion, in this case conflating the view that something is fun with the criticisms Matthew Matosis brought to the table. These two things are not the same thing. Then he says for a joke that every other critic is stupid, but as he makes clear in his own video, he actually would like to kind of just say that as a joke, but he genuinely believes it, and he's going to explain what he means.
Okay, I can't even make that joke here. You see, the overly negative critical response from Souls diehards in some spheres of the internet isn't even accurate to what most game critics said when the game first came out. On the whole, people loved it. The misgivings came specifically from folks like Matthew Matosis, and the popularity of his video, predicated centrally on how the game couldn't possibly be as good as the first because Miyazaki didn't make it, and locking on in some fights isn't a good idea, and the opening cutscene didn't talk about a war that already happened and has no effect on us as a player.
Okay, he says first that the overly negative critical response from the Souls diehards in some spheres isn't relative to the perspectives of game critics when the game released. To simplify that for you, he is saying, Souls fans have a different perspective now compared to critics when the game first released. Whether or not this piece of evidence is remotely true or false, it is an absolutely bizarre piece of evidence to bring up. Literally another worldly argument. Are you saying that it is strange that people who take a huge amount of time to explain and comb through the ideas of a video game disagreed with those who released a day one review? The people who passionately love the games and development disagreed with those who are doing this for day one views and money. This seems natural to me. What's the issue? What does that even prove? He then sums up Matthew Matosis' video with 3 points. The game can't be as good when Miyazaki didn't make it. Locking on in some fights isn't a good idea. The opening isn't about a war. This is pretty much just an insult to Matthew Matosis entirely. It really sucks from my perspective because I look at Matthew Matosis and I see like similar effort to what I go through to put these fucking videos together, and to see it reduced by someone like H-Bomber Guy to those 3 statements, that's just really sad, and shit like that shouldn't really happen on the internet. Like, it's always nice to have a sort of equal amount of appreciation for the work that you do compared to how much effort you put in. Like, Matthew Matosis is pretty much set in that department. He has a huge amount of fans that can appreciate his work, but there are plenty of people who won't be able to have that. There are plenty of people who will literally just be looking at a criticism like that, and they'll be convinced that their work is no good, so why would they put that much effort in the first place? Like, it's a fair point. Why should anybody put the effort in to make a 10-hour video series in-depthly going through every single problem in a game while providing as much evidence as they can and simple argumentation to get their points across when it can be reduced to that? I can only imagine what Matthew would have said about the game if Scholar had released by the time he had made his video, because it probably would have been a lot worse. Harris has responded to barely any of his video. In fact, it's kind of evident that he didn't listen to any of the video, and he is now hilariously trying to convince you that he's wiped the floor with it. This is in aid of saying that the opinion of Dark Souls 2 from the world has changed thanks to Matthew Matosis, and he is fucking right. Matt gave people what they needed to explain themselves. He put into words and evidence what they felt. Harris, on the other hand, in addition to several other arguments, has said things like,
It was already complete in its incompleteness.
but despite that, he is implying that Matt is the one that's using weak argumentation to change the perspective people have on the game, which isn't helping people explain anything for themselves. All he's done is fuck the argument about Dark Souls 2.
Ignore how, in Dark Souls 2, there's a similar ancient war in the distant past, but you get to learn about it over the course of the game instead of a pre-rendered cutscene at the beginning, and then you get to actually go fight in it? Critics at the time of release liked it a lot, the exact same way critics liked Demon's Souls a lot back when this whole series was new and strange and not many people played or liked it. People who think about games a lot are more likely to easily get into a new experience than people who just play them as a hobby.
So he says the war between Vendrick and the Giants is better delivered as something to learn about than see in a cutscene. There's a lot to talk about here, but how much you like each delivery method is really up to the audience. The cutscene in Dark Souls built the world as to why the war happened, what happened as a result, and what the major players of the war are doing now. And what the major players of the war are doing now is the game. You will read about those things and talk to people about them, the once great dragon fighting heroes reduced to what they are now. Dark Souls 2 has a similar method of discovering the details, but fighting in the war? You go to 3 memories where a small patch of land is given a filter and a set of enemies we've already seen with the goal of killing a very lackluster boss as the highlight. Both of these wars are just as distant and relevant to their respective games, but the idea that an opening cutscene is inherently bad is ridiculous when stripped of intentions and effects, and who even knows what the War for the Giants was about without delving into the lore? I really don't see much of a difference between either of these things, and besides, many people, including people like Joseph Anderson, consider the giant memories to be absolute shit. Next, he says that critics liked Demon's Souls a lot when it released, and they liked Dark Souls 2 when it released. This is completely irrelevant. The Day 1 critics should not be trusted for anything aside from opinion as far as I'm concerned, and even then they are weak with supporting evidence. I have no idea how he thinks this is going to support any kind of argument. He says,
People who think about games a lot are more likely to easily get into a new experience than people who just play them as a hobby.
I really don't think that can be proved. People who think about games? What does that even mean? Are you saying those who take their time with games rather than treating them as a hobby are better at getting into new experiences? I will let him develop this.
Internet critics like Yahtzee wiped their ass all over various aspects of the games that would later say they loved when audiences started to get a hang of the games and it turned out they were talking bollocks.
Fuck you, Demon's Souls. A challenge is one thing, but trying to break down a fucking cement wall with your forehead isn't a challenge, it's grounds for getting fucking sectioned.
Demon's Souls is one of the most rewarding, challenging games ever to hit the PS3. It may not be for everyone, but I still urge everyone to at least try it.
And GameSpot's 2009 Game of the Year is Demon's Souls.
Demon's Souls is like nothing you've ever played.
Yahtzee is a great critic for the fact that he's witty and fast. He isn't exactly super accurate with a lot of his work. I imagine that's down to the fact that he covers so many games so quickly. Taking his perspective alone on Demon's Souls seems a little disingenuous and retarded as an example of internet critics changing their mind over time. And by the way, GameSpot, GameRadar, and IGN are easily considered internet critics as well, whether or not they are also laughingstock. The point here is that Harris is saying that the knee-jerk reaction from critics isn't accurate to the quality of the game, and the critics like IGN and GameSpot are usually the canary in the coal mine for the actual quality of a game, he is monumentally wrong. To use them as examples of accurate games journalism is beyond hilarious, and they get shit wrong constantly. Just look at the fact-checking they get in their average reviews from the comment section. Hell, the Yooka-Laylee and Outlast reviews were awful, and I expected that going in, but I still had to watch through all of it. It has become a meme to not listen to these people, and they are welcome to make their money from trailers, interviews, and top 10s, but don't tell me people actually respect their perspective, Harris. Come the fuck on.
Do you hear that?
It was the best and most innovative game of 2009.
That's Kevin Van Flipping Ord. That's the thought criminal who was so wrong about Fallout 3 he was found dead in his cell last year, next to an apology written in my blood. Even he has been on the ground floor of the Souls series since day one. It turns out that professional game critics are quite often more ahead of the curve than the average consumer, or the, not to be rude, fanboy types who will dismiss a sequel for being too different to the one they first fell in love with.
So there's a lot to unpack there. Firstly, he openly provides an example of when day one critics have been drastically wrong, yet will conclude that they are right about the Souls series. That is absolutely stupid, and he knows it. He says that Kevin has been on the ground floor of the Souls series since day one, which means absolutely nothing, when the premise for this video is that everyone who loved Dark Souls 1 got Dark Souls 2 wrong, despite implying here that Kevin is very consistent compared to everyone else. Besides, somebody who loved all of the games, it shows they don't have taste, since there is something huge to say about the quality of each game and how different they are as the series progresses. Harris then refers to people at IGN and GameSpot as professional games critics, which is bizarre, as anyone who is paid to critique games is technically professional. Hell, I'm currently on $14 a month, so I'm arguably a professional. I swear to God, the next time I check that, it's going to go down now. So this distinction is useless to the discussion, but he uses it to call Matthew Matosis a fanboy who is dismissing the sequel of the game they first fell in love with. This is probably the hardest part to listen to of all of his embarrassing slants at Matt. He degrades the guy's work as a result of being a fanboy and claims he is dismissing it because of the love he has for the first game. If you knew Matt's other work, you would know that he loves Demon Souls, so apparently he doesn't quite have that unwavering love for the first, since he loved Dark Souls 1 subsequently. But I find it interesting that you accuse him of dismissing content due to a blind fanboyish love when you're literally spending over an hour to respond to highly specific points in his video while ignoring hundreds of others that he makes. Comparatively, I've responded to every point you've made. I can only imagine you avoid responding to his points because you couldn't defend your game, and it is your blind love for it that made you omit or dismiss them entirely. But that is, of course, just a theory.
Mainstream game critics can be wrong, but they've been consistently right about the Souls series from day one. It's only corners of the internet full of rose-tinted fanboyishness towards the first Dark Souls that result in the ridiculous treatment of the second game. When it comes down to it, Dark Souls was a fantastic game, even though it's flawed in a lot of ways that are so much more obvious now than ever.
He opens with embarrassingly saying that the mainstream critics can be wrong, but in this arbitrary instance they were right. There's nothing to support this, he just says it. He also just says that hatred for Dark Souls 2 came from rose-tinted fanboyishness, which once again, he only responded to about 3 of Matt's points and hasn't proved him wrong, while also not proving the criticisms of Dark Souls 2 to be anything but valid. Yet he makes this claim. He says the game has been given ridiculous treatment. He hasn't shown us what the treatment is or why it's unfair.
I think the sheer surprise of how good Dark Souls was, after most people missed the boat on Demon Souls, made it a hard act to follow, and lots of fans got unrealistic expectations about it. The online response to Dark Souls 3 sounds overall lukewarm but positive, and I think that might be because, at least in regards to this one series, maybe not a couple others, people have cooled and learned to manage their expectations.
He says that people may have gotten unrealistic expectations for Dark Souls 2. Perhaps this is true, but personally I don't think it's unrealistic to want a good sequel to a game. That should be something that the developers are more than able to pull off. He says that Dark Souls 3 has had a lukewarm but still better response than Dark Souls 2, and it could be because fans have cooled, when in reality it's more to do with the fact that the game is actually very well made, though it was a little bit too referential to Dark Souls 1 and took more of the arbitrary elements without maintaining something of a fantastical world once again.
I'm interested.
I think here's the other thing. When Dark Souls 3 was released, after Dark Souls 2, hearing that Dark Souls 3 was released and having to sit through the trailer and be like, okay, another Souls game's coming out. Is it gonna be like Dark Souls 1 or is it gonna be like Dark Souls 2? I'm excited for another game in the series to come out because I like the series. But if it's like 2, I don't know about that. If it's like 1, I'm going to be a little bit more receptive. That's I think, at least from my perspective, that's kind of what H-Bomber describes as lukewarm reaction to it. I still bought it day 1. I didn't pre-order it because I think pre-ordering games is fucking stupid, especially when all you get's a digital version. But I most certainly purchased it on the first day and played it the first day and kept playing it until it was like 4 o'clock in the morning. But again, the whole idea of like, oh, it's a lukewarm but like mostly positive reaction. Yeah, it's mostly positive because people want to play another game in the series. It's lukewarm because they don't know if it's going to be like Dark Souls 1 or if it's going to be like Dark Souls 2. Thankfully, it was much more like 1 than 2 with a little bit more Demon Souls aspects to it, with the reintroduction of magic, or what was later called focus points. But yeah, the what he called again lukewarm reaction to it was very much warranted after going through Demon Souls, Dark Souls, and Dark Souls 2. 3 similar games, but very different in how they were appreciated, we'll say, by the community.
In finally getting to play it after working for so long on videos about the games that preceded it. I'm a little worried that the fan reaction to some aspects of 2 made them walk back on the good ideas in an effort to be more like the first one, but I'm going to play it and judge it on its own merits as its own game before I really consider that.
He's just sharing his perspective here, and that's fine, but it is interesting to see him preemptively begin his next video in relation to the Souls series, and that will likely be on Dark Souls 3, and how it was terrible because it removed much of what Dark Souls 2 brought to the table. From what I know, Dark Souls 3 kept all of the positive design choices from Dark Souls 2 that were innovations, true evolutions of the series. It kept the very best that Dark Souls 2 had to offer. Like, 4 rings instead of 2.
In the meantime, Dark Souls 2 is not perfect, but you can have a grand old time with it. The gameplay contains some of the tightest moments in the whole series, and some really fun variations on the formula. It tells a story that, instead of redoing the original or trying to build on it in a straightforward way, self-consciously explores what it means to exist in a specific position in gaming culture, and asks us what the things we desire from games say about us.
So we are now into the conclusion of the series, the part where we make some statements as a result of the information we have just been through, and Harris opens with saying that Dark Souls 2 isn't perfect. This is true. You can have fun with the game. This is true. The gameplay contains some of the tightest moments in the series. Considering hitboxes, backstabs, the restrictive movement, the inconsistent PvE, the broken focus system, the several other fundamental elements of the game, there is nothing anyone can objectively say about the game containing tighter moments than Dark Souls 1 or 3's refined systems. I will be proving what I just said in the future video, but we've not covered it yet, so just believe me for now, okay? There's evidence for all of this. Besides, this means nothing coming from Harris, because as he already admitted, he hasn't played Dark Souls 3 at this point, and yet he will confidently claim Dark Souls 2 as some of the tightest moments of the series. This is the kind of unsubstantiated statement you would expect from a fanboy. He says they have fun variations on the formula, which is about as vague as you can get, but then he gets philosophical on us and says the game explores what it's like to exist in a specific position in gaming culture, and asks what things we desire from games and what it says about us. This is absolute nonsense. You guys need to listen to me here. This is nonsense. It's been put at the end to pretend there is something incredibly deep about the game and its poorer quality. This is something he's done already, claiming that something is broken on purpose and the reason is so deep that everyone missed it. I really do advise that you ignore unsubstantiated sophistry like this. It absolutely serves no purpose but to pop out of nowhere to gain brownie points and convince the audience something amazing happened. By the way, Harris does this on purpose. He is fully aware of it. He even makes fun of himself for it in other YouTube videos. Look at this.
Here's the part where I wrap up and give some pithy comments about how developers have things to learn from Bloodborne.
And now, think about that statement when listening to this.
It tells a story that, instead of redoing the original or trying to build on it in a straightforward way, self-consciously explores what it means to exist in a specific position in gaming culture, and asks us what the things we desire from games say about us.
It's just funny when you put this stuff together because it can show how much of a charlatan certain YouTubers are. They know what to do. They know how to tell a story in their own videos. And humans love stories, however bad or good, with Dark Souls actually being strong evidence for that. So Harris ends his video with this to make the journey feel like it would lead up to here. But honestly, if you would listen to what he actually said, he's just trying to make this project feel deep and meaningful, when all he's just done for over an hour is ramble on about bad things mysteriously being excellent things and attack other content creators for proving the game to be flawed. Listen to his video, folks. You will end up finding more shit to criticize than I do, I swear.
I really enjoyed Dark Souls 2, and I think there's a lot of things that make it good, and if you didn't enjoy it, that's okay. Your different opinions and experiences are equally as valid, and I know I talk authoritatively sometimes, but I hope it's clear I'm just offering my opinion in a way I think is interesting or convincing, and it's okay to disagree with me. For now.
Harris then ends his video in saying everyone can have an opinion, which is fine. He then says he may talk authoritatively, but you should know that when he does it, it isn't meant to be authoritative. That it is simply meant to be an entertaining way of being convincing or interesting. An interesting way to be convincing. This is the worst quote of the entire video. This is probably the worst quote of all of his work. This is something I have a huge problem with. It isn't just Harris though. He is a part of a larger group of people who either accidentally or deliberately fuck up language to say something definitively when they simply want to. The typical example is when Joseph Anderson authoritatively exclaimed that Soma was not a horror game. People do it all the fucking time, and as you saw here, Harris is saying it works as a way to convince people of your perspective, and he's right. When people hear you make a conclusion and haven't understood the evidence or haven't felt the evidence was all there, they will often be taken away by how you stated that last conclusion. But as I said, you should really just see if what they said helped you understand the topic more, or if you just wanted to listen to someone talk about games like many of my audience may actually watch my videos for, then that's okay too. It just bugs me that people keep getting away with such poorly made videos. Like, you may be confused here. I'm saying it's bad writing. It's not like he's using it to be special in terms of convincing people something. You should only get to make definitive claims like that once you've actually shown reason for the claim to be conclusive. But you know what? This is just a precursor. This is going to be something I cover more and more as my videos go on. I'm almost certain of it. Harris finishes by jokingly saying that it's okay to disagree with him for now, but it is very clear with how he reacted to Matthew Matosis that he does not like being on the wrong side of the argument and will force the idea that he is right regardless of the topic. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is every last point in his video fully responded to. I know there is a fringe element of people out there who wanted this video to exist. Hell, I'm one of them. But of the responses I've seen so far, near enough all of them begin their video with saying they're not going to respond to every point because that would be ridiculous. Well, I fucking did it. But I imagine that this entire video series will slink under the carpet and my fan base will have something to chew on, but if it gets linked to other places and discussion happens, that's cool too. Overall, Harris has created a terrible video. This thing is honestly his worst work, and it comes directly from his love for the product. He can't defend it properly, and even if he could, the game still falls short in many ways. Many objective ways. I didn't make this series because I hate Harris. I actually like him a lot. I could see myself getting along with him very easily. I won't be unsubscribing for a hell of a long time as long as he keeps being interesting to me. But the reason I was thorough and unforgiving is because I actually kind of care about him, as gay as that sounds. To put it a better way, here is Logic explaining why he criticized Armored Skeptic. Both of them have known each other for a long time, but Armored Skeptic may have made a few mistakes in a video as of recently, and so Logic felt the need to explain why he was so harsh to Armored Skeptic rather than being extremely friendly, let's say. And I think it pretty much entirely applies to this situation.
When I call out people I didn't expect to have to call out, I'm a little bit harsher, yeah. It's kind of this thing of like, I thought you were better than that, dude. What are you doing? I use a sledgehammer to make sure that message is actually going to get through, not just to you, but to your audience. And that's what's going to happen again in this video. I find it really important that I criticize you on this, and not in a tweet.
I honestly think you're better than this, Harris. You've made way better videos, and I think it would be pretty awesome if you honestly remade your Dark Souls 2 video, or at the very least made a part 2 to clear things up. I don't know. Overall, I hope feelings weren't hurt, but that's practically unavoidable, and if ever Harris somehow saw these videos, which would be very unlikely, then I would love to discuss his ideas about Dark Souls 2 and the series in general, but I don't think he's gonna like me very much after seeing this, if he sees it. So I guess I'll simply say, join me next time, folks, when we're basically going to lay out the positives of Dark Souls 2 as well as the grueling negatives. I hope you've enjoyed this series so far, but those who are only interested in watching the responsive parts of the series, that is now over. Next time, it's all me, baby. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.
Wow.
He claims he just wants to understand why people feel the way they do, which normally would be fine, but he still hasn't addressed the majority of Matthew Matosis' videos' criticisms to He claims that he just wants to understand why people feel the way they do, which normally would be fine, He claims he just wants to understand why people feel the way they do, which normally would be fine, but he still doesn't address the majority of majosis. What's a majosis?
But no, it turns out my perspective can be flawed.
Okay. We have finally finished all of these from part 1 to part 8, and I can say, let me make sure I'm getting this all in here. And so I can say that I agree with pretty much everything Mahler has said. It seems as though he was nowhere near as popular on YouTube before he started out in this. I think at one point he said he only has like 2 or 3K subscribers. Just for reference, he has 362K subscribers now. So 362,000 subscribers. He's got some other stuff in here where he calls it an Unbridled Rage, which I'm sure is a series that he was able to put together. Many of them are involving Marvel, or I would just call them Disney brand sort of things. I would assume at some point that H-Bomber has seen these. What I can say is that yes, I agree with him on pretty much every aspect from not playing the game in the past 3 years. In fact, this video came out November 8th of 2017, and I last played Dark Souls 2 November 25th of 2017. So we're talking about a huge expanse of time that I have gone without playing this game. A lot of the gameplay I still remember from my nearly 350 hours of it. But since we have completed parts 1 through 8 in his read in Defense of Dark Souls 2, A Measured Response, I'm going to download the game, perhaps play it later tonight, I'm not sure, if I can remember how to beat the game in less than 4 hours. I probably will not be able to do that, considering the fact that it is 6:30 right now, spending time with the family until approximately 8 or 9 o'clock, and then streaming from there. It may be something that I have to pick up tomorrow on Sunday, probably sometime in the afternoon. But I will be playing through Dark Souls 2 just to see if some of his criticisms hold up. Unfortunately, I won't be able to do the thing that I love to do, which is to skip every single cutscene, because not allowed to do that because the story is part of the game. But I will be playing through it from a mechanical standpoint and seeing if there's any improvements or anything that maybe I changed my opinion on from not having played the game in almost 4 years, which more realistically would be about 3.5 at the point that I am currently streaming this. So, I'll either stream this here or on Megadome. We will have to wait and see. Probably will end up on Megadome, just because why the fuck not? Not sure what kind of character I'm going to make first. I'm going to keep myself from looking at the wiki and just trying to play it based upon memory. And if I feel the need to, if I feel so compelled, I will play Scholar of the First Sin after watching this last video right here where he has an In Defense of Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin, which I think is a much more difficult thing to try and post, we'll say, since his In Defense video is nearly an hour, almost 2 hours long, and he's been kind of shitting on it through the entire duration of this. But again, I agree with pretty much everything he says. I don't like the stuff he says about Dark Souls 3, but then again, I am fanboy for Dark Souls 3, and I think it is, in fact, the best one in the series, or at least the trilogy from Dark Souls 1 to Scholar of the First Sin, and also 3. I like it more than Sekiro. I think that the variety and, callbacks to different parts of the game were nice, and that's pretty much all I can say. I just like it because I like it better. Really not much more to say than that. But like I said, I'm going to play through Dark Souls 2. Maybe start later tonight. Maybe start tomorrow. Not sure. But we'll just have to get to there when we get to there. So for now, this is what AIM had requested. Watching through the whole thing. Doing a VOD of it. So we're done with that part. And I suppose I will play through the game later. I keep saying it as if I'm going to do it, as if I'm just encouraging myself. Right now, BDO unfortunately has a fishing event that I do not participate in, where it is just fishing AFK in a shitty area. That drives up the price of triple float rods, which are what I primarily fish with, and also makes them go completely out of stock, which is very annoying when you want to fish. So I probably won't be able to do any fishing. New World doesn't release until literally a month from now, so I can't start grinding in that in the meantime. So Dark Souls 2 seems like a pretty good way to fill in the gaps in the interim. Like I said, I will download it later tonight, or I'll download it actually right now, and when it finishes downloading, I will hopefully have some free time and start playing through it. Megadome.org. That's probably where I'll be streaming it. Okay. We're done.